Hi everyone, welcome to Enhance Your Startup Solutions with Dedicated Copilot Experience. My name is Anne-Claire Lubianco and I'm part of the Microsoft for Startup team. I will be your host today. So we are excited to basically having you all for the next 2.5 hours. As you know, we have a lot of speakers and sessions for you today, and we're going to have a 5 minute break in between. As you can see, you have the possibility to ask any questions you want on the chat. We have technical people ready to answer all of your questions, live. If at some point during the event we are not able to answer your technical questions, as the majority of you are part of the Founders Hub program, you have the possibility to book technical session with our Azure pairing team. I will put all of the links on the chat, but if you want to ask your question, you can ask them live. And if you think that you need to have another technical session, then we strongly advise you to organize a meeting with the Azure pairing team. But for now, I'm delighted to have the first speaker of the day with Adi Ron, who will be speaking about the Era of AI Copilot for Startup by Microsoft and OpenAI.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Microsoft for Startups Discovery Day around building your own Copilot. My name's Adiran, and I'm the CTO in residence here at Microsoft for Startups, and I'll be taking you through the keynote of talking about the Era of AI Copilot by Microsoft and OpenAI. A lot of the startups that I'm working with are actually looking at AI as a platform revolution and not just a feature that you can use here and there within your application. And I tend to believe that that revolution will actually look at a different way for building software rather than just infusing GPT-4 or ChatGPT in your applications. Today's sessions will be exactly around this. How do you change the mindset of how to build software and infusing that AI Copilot, similarly to how Microsoft and other startups that you will see today actually did to their own existing SaaS applications? Hopefully by the end of today, you will understand how to build your own Copilot, but more importantly, why that matters, why acting on building AI Copilot and infusing those capabilities into your startup and into your software is critical at this day and age. So if you want to future-proof your application to make sure that it really meets the standards of what we think will happen with the AI revolution, this session is definitely for you. Let's talk briefly about what is a platform. I like to talk about what Bill Gates actually refers to a platform, which is when the economic value of everybody that uses it actually exceeds the value of the company that created it. Then we're looking at a platform. And think about a lot of the platforms that we're currently building too. For example, the iPhone. The iPhone, there's an economic value to Apple, but there's far bigger one for the App Store and all of the applications that you actually saw revolutionizing or kind of disrupting the economy through that platform. We can think about companies like Airbnb, like Spotify, like Netflix, like Uber. They use that platform to actually dramatically revolutionize a specific domain or an industry. And the biggest question around AI is whether or not this is the new platform. Can we look at AI not just a new API set that we can use, but actually a platform that may think or change the way that we're delivering software and talking to our users and sort of showcasing our IP to the startups and the users that are using it. So that really takes us to the idea of Copilot. And Copilot, you may know this from GitHub Copilot, which was actually the first Copilot that we created, but that's not a feature. That's actually a mindset. A mindset of Copilot means that we are taking the user, which is currently the primary person that is using your application, and merging it or matching it with an AI assistant. And do we see different patterns and different usage that is actually happening when we're merging those two together? Think about most of your applications. Currently, they're really built to a user that knows what it's doing. He needs to know all of your UX. He needs to know all of your screens. You need to pre-package or prepare those UX and those UI screens to make sure that they are working with everything that the user wants to do. So if a user wants to do something and you haven't created the specific UX for it, or he doesn't even know how to start using with your UX, then he can't really make the most of your IP. Copilot is exactly the change that we've been waiting for years to make sure that everything as I'm thinking it and as I'm saying it is exactly how I'm interacting with your IP. I don't need to know anything else but how to speak. And that really creates the magic of activating your APIs, your IPs, and your startup's offering. So that's really the idea behind a Copilot. Think about it as an application that uses modern AI to assist the users and and you yourself with complex cognitive tasks. So when you embrace that idea, that's far bigger than just GitHub or any of the other copilots that Microsoft actually introduced. That's a new method for delivering software applications. And if we used to think about application as I have the user interface layer, I have the business logic layer, I have the data layer, now we're actually thinking about a different layer mechanism. There's a way for us to interact directly from the natural language processing and the LLMs of the world directly with your IP. We don't need to pre-package or pre-create a lot of those capabilities through user interface. We may allow the user to ask for those cognitive tasks in the way that he's thinking them or the way that he would tell them to any other person, rather ChatGPT or a real person. Let's look at some of the Microsoft Copilots, and we've been really hard at work to embrace that mechanism to our platforms. And look at some of the things here are quite old platforms. Microsoft Office, for example, Word, Outlook, Excel, they were built for years with the idea that if you want to make the most of that IP, you need to understand what you're doing. Think about Excel, for example. This is an amazing tool, one of my personal favorites in Office. But you need to be very advanced user to make the most out of it. And as the platform grew and that offering grew, the complexity level grew, and then we've seen churn or misutilization of those new features by users because that became too complicated for them. It's not that the features were not there, it's conveying what they want to do with those features through that complexity that was added to some of those formulas or the new languages that were introduced in Excel and new features, the new screens, that became too complicated. So how do you mitigate that? How do you build a mechanism that allow you to get very complicated in your offering, but not overcomplicating the user? And that's what I think Copilot did for everything that you see here on the screen, from Excel to Windows to Dynamics to Bing and Edge, all the way through GitHub that you already know and the Power Platform. Let's look at Microsoft 365 Copilot. The way that it works is it actually takes the foundation models like GPT-4 and it then infuses it with the Microsoft Graph data. So instead of that just being a foundational model that was trained by until data from 2021, it now has some grounding with your graph data. So it can understand specifically the language and the data that is being conveyed by Microsoft 365. And once you take both of those things and publish it through a Microsoft 365 app, then you actually have a new way of users to interact with that software, and that's through a Copilot. Let's look at an example. So if you want to add content to Word, instead of doing that scraping from SAP and trying to understand specifically what to write, you can actually just convey what is the thinking. I want to require certifications for sustainability. That does that specific questioning for the data that is exposed through the graph and paste it into the software. So instead of doing a lot of manual work, you're actually increasing your productivity with the same capabilities that Office actually offered for years now. But the cognitive task is so easy for the user. It can do much more in much less time. And I can tell you one thing about Copilots, and that's something you can take for every offering within you building your own Copilot. Once you're building it, you simply can't go back. I can't go and do manual things today after I started working with Copilot that really understands me. And if you want to delight your users in the way that we're delighting our users, that Copilot is a great way for you to really change the way that you're interacting with your IP and you're offering your solutions. Let's look at some additional thinkings around the era of Copilot. So as you probably understand, that's a new development pattern. We're used to the pattern that everything has to be fixated in a pre-configured user interface, and then there's a lot of APIs that are exposed to that interface. We're looking at something completely different. That's a unique AI-based architecture that allows you to go specifically from the thinking to the language to activating your IP. If you're looking at this as a platform, a new architecture, then you're really maximizing what you can do with AI. It's not just using that API or calling ChatGPT or GPT-4 to summarize something. You're actually doing something inherently different and delighting your customers or making them do the most of your IP and your software, because when they're thinking it, they're saying it, and it's done. And there's no mitigation between that they need to learn something and do something complicated within your user experience to make their wishes come through your software. And then the third piece is actually a growing platform reach. Now, the ChatGPT, and you've probably been experiencing this yourself, has been growing tremendously. There's a lot of new users, and we're one of the fastest growing platforms from a consumer standpoint in the world. So taking that into account, may look at this as a new app store or a new plugin store that can really publish your offering, your startup, in a new mechanism. That may live, not just Copilot doesn't have to live in your application. It can also be exposed to ChatGPT itself and maybe live through their platform and through a plugin. So that's a really dramatic mindset shift. And if you're an existing startup or a new startup, you don't have just to think about your IP and what are you trying to disrupt. You also need to be future-proof in the way that you're actually navigating or exposing that API or your IP to users. You need to think about that new AI-based architecture and the new platform reach, and that definitely leads you into a new dev pattern. Let's talk a little bit about the Copilot stack. And again, this is still the keynote, so I'll be very high level, but throughout the day, you will see some really cool examples of how to build this. So if we're looking at the architecture, it's still layered to three places. We have the application layer, we have the orchestration layer, which is somehow the business logic layer, and then we have the foundational model and the infrastructure. So we still have three layers, but they're acting quite different. And a lot of the copilots that we're thinking about building, specifically your copilots, are built to that new stack. That stack is great if you're using with GitHub and Visual Studio, which, by the way, is part of Founders Hub. So throughout the day, we will tell you the best way to start with building the Copilot stack is actually maximizing the benefits of Founders Hub, which is the Microsoft for Startups program that you're part of. So looking at Visual Studio and some of the capabilities there and infusing some of the benefits within Azure OpenAI is probably the best way for you to put your foot in the door in terms of building that Copilot stack. So if you haven't used that, or you haven't even registered to Founders Hub, that's definitely a first call to action here, because most of what you'll see from this point on is actually part of the program. So let's talk a little bit about the app and the extensibility that we can do. So Copilot, the way to interact with digital world is through plugins. As we all know, Copilot and the data is trained about a specific set of data. Even GPT-4 is trained up to data to 2021. If you want to get some of that context of the digital world, the things that you're doing to Copilot, we have to have a plugin that enables that Copilot to interact with the digital world. So a plugin is actually a way to augment AI systems to access your API, to retrieve some of that useful information that it needs, and to perform new computations. Also, a key thing that we'll talk about throughout the day is to safely act within the user's behalf, because once we augment this as part of the system, we need to think about how to be respectful and responsible to our users. We can't have this running around doing things that are not part of the responsible AI, because that is actually what is interacting with your users. You need to be very strict with the fact that it safely acts within their behalf. Let's look at a plugin example, and that's one of my favorite examples. You can see some of the plugin stores in ChatGPT itself. So we're actually using OpenTable and Instacart right now. That means that now when you're asking a question to ChatGPT, it's actually not looking at its own data, but it can also enable some of those plugins. So for example, it uses that to question OpenTable and then see a great restaurant that is quite near what you wanted, where you're at. It actually looks at the chickpea salad that you can order there and look at some of the calories that it currently has. And one of the coolest things that I personally think is happening right now is actually taking all of this into Instacart and shoving it into your cart within Instacart. So think about the fact that you've just now interacted with ChatGPT, but it was very grounded in some of those plugins that you can now actually act in behalf of other startups or other offerings. This is an exciting new platform, exciting new app store for you to start infusing, because that's a new way for you to expose your API to ChatGPT and other copilots as well. I actually want to announce something that I think is a groundbreaking announcement here, which is Copilot extensibility and around plugins is common across ChatGPT, Bing Chat, all of the Microsoft Copilots that you've seen, Windows Copilot, and actually your own Copilot as well. We've thought long and hard about how to create that platform. It's something that would be so easy to create. And if we're looking at previous platforms, we didn't want to create like there's an Android store and an iPhone store. If you want to interact with both of them, you have to create separate things. That's common extensibility allows you to build one plugin that can interact with your Copilot and then use it or infuse it in many, many different Copilots as well. So it can sit within your service, but it can also sit within Bing Chat or within ChatGPT or any of the Microsoft Copilots. So that extensibility model is quite crucial. If you want to explore more of this, you will see throughout the sessions. And obviously, you can also look at this in some of the things that we're doing. You can see it here in the next slide. Let's talk a little bit about ChatGPT itself. So that's the fastest consumer product in history. I know Threads has been surpassing it a little bit, but it did surpass 1 million users in 5 days and more than 100 million users of monthly active users. I think currently that's the largest AI ecosystem in the world. And if you've been using ChatGPT, you know that that's a huge user base for you to start exploring and exploiting for what you want to do. So don't think about ChatGPT as just an API. That's a platform. That's a big platform, a big API, a big ecosystem for you, shiny new ecosystem for you to publish your offerings and maybe get new users, get new usage, and expand your footprint to the users of ChatGPT. If you want to try it, this is a great place to start. You will see some demos today, but I do want to make sure that everything that we're sharing with you is also available in some of our repos. So aka.ms/plugin repo. If you want to build your first one, you can definitely do this today with everything that is available throughout Founders Hub. Let's talk about the AI orchestration model. So obviously getting that data and connecting it is one thing, but we also need some orchestration. So just getting the prompt is not enough to putting it into the foundational model. Sometimes we want to do something different. We want to make sure that we orchestrate some of that work to really reflect what we want the user to do in our behalf. So again, thinking in a platform and not just as a feature, that means that we need some orchestration model that creates or kind of pivots the AI to what we want it to do. So we actually have Azure AI to do specifically that with Azure AI infrastructure, machine learning, cognitive services, and Azure OpenAI service. And again, I will say all of those are available to you through Founders Hub, so you can definitely start using them today. I actually wanted to show you a few things that are quite cool. One is Azure OpenAI service on your data. You will see a demo for this later today, led by Amit. But the thing is that you can now use Azure OpenAI on specific data sources that you're bringing to the table, which means you can educate it to talk in the language of your IP, your users, your offering, and make it very, very domain and specific. So I know we've been calling it generative AI, but for most of the startups, we actually don't want generative AI. We want very specific and not overly generified. So that's a really good way to bring all of your insights and create your own flavor of Azure OpenAI. It still has the large language model capabilities, but it knows much more about what your users want and what the intent of your application is. Let's see a demo of this real quickly. So you can see that I'm now building it into Azure Cognitive Search. I can provide some of that content data, and then I'm creating the data source, and that's it. Once you got into the playground, it's super easy to get those tickets, see those references, and really ground this and have that built into your own data. So think about the fact that if you want to ask, how do I create a support ticket, which is a very basic question, this time you will get an answer that is super specific to what you're offering and not the generic ChatGPT answer. And as you can see, it's quite easy to use, and you will see a larger demos for this later today. Another cool thing that I wanted to show with you is called prompt flow. Again, something we'll see more today. And that means that once you get the input, the prompt, you can do some manipulation on that prompt as part of the orchestration. You can do some question embedding. You can retrieve some data that really brings additional context into that data, a prompt before sending it into LLM. For example, in the cart example you've seen earlier, if someone wants to bring the cart data there, we actually need to drive response to that specific cart. So you can see we're actually calling it directly and adding all of this response into the prompt itself. Sometimes when a user asks something, you actually want to manipulate this with some of your data, your APIs, the works that you can do with things that you already exposed, to make sure that that is specifically bringing all of the context that ChatGPT or GPT-4 needs to make sure that the answer is the right one. So think about that orchestration layer as really the business logic of prompting. You're getting it from your plugin, you're getting it from GPT-4 or ChatGPT, and then you want to do something specifically different and monitor it differently to make sure that you're doing the right thing within that flow. So that's like a flow to a prompt. That's why you call it prompt flow. And you can see really good examples of this in later sessions. Another cool thing here that we want to highlight is the AI infrastructure. So obviously, you know already that Azure is the world's AI supercomputer. We've used it with OpenAI to train GPT and do a lot of cool things with it. We actually currently now support 65 regions with 200 data centers around the world and a lot of miles of fiber and networks and more to plan. So that's really strong cloud footprint that is aimed for building AI. It's not just specific cloud, it's really cloud that was built for AI. And I think we have the greatest example in the world, which is GPT itself. Now, Azure AI is a little different than what you know, and I know this is a question we're getting a lot when we're talking about Copilot. A lot of startups are saying, this is amazing. I really want to have that new mechanism to interact with my users, which is not UX-based, but maybe natural language-based. But what would I do with all of the data? There's a lot of things there that may feel less comfortable in terms of security and privacy. So a couple of things that you need to remember. Azure OpenAI Service Instance is isolated from every other customer. That's quite different, quite unique to Azure, and that's something you can definitely trust. Your data is not used to train the foundational AI models, and I know you may compare this to other offerings like the public OpenAI, but we're actually committing to you that that data is not used to train foundational models, but it's only your data. And that data is actually protected by the most comprehensive enterprise compliance and security controls that are already part of Azure. That means HIPAA, PCI, GDPR, and a lot of those compliance that are already part of Azure are already part of Azure AI and Azure OpenAI. So that's not just AI, it's AI you can trust. And if we talked a lot about OpenAI, and obviously that's kind of the ground jewel, which we're looking at GPT-4, that's the Rolls Royce of models. But we're looking to expand beyond this and thinking in the layers. We have the app and the orchestration. You can also think about the data, the foundational models, and something that is interchangeable. We actually just announced the Azure Machine Learning Model Catalog. It allows you to not just use OpenAI, but also infuse some things from Hugging Face, open source models. We've just announced Llama 2, which is our partnership with Meta, that will also be available here. So don't think about always using one model for everything. GPT-4 might be the best one in my opinion, but sometimes you don't need the best one. You may want to do something that is more cost effective or taking into account some of your industry specific or domain specific learnings, and use some of the open source from Hugging Face and still use everything from prompt flow and the Copilot and everything. So thinking about this in layers means that you're actually not writing to a specific model. You can actually explore a lot of different foundational models for different scenarios and really think about this as part of the platform. So again, go away from the mindset of this is a feature I want to use. This is a new architecture that I can bring and build and probably a new mechanism for me to interact with my users, regardless of the IP that you're bringing into the table. So this is the era of AI copilots. Hopefully that keynote actually got you to really be intrigued about what that can do to your startup. Throughout the day, you will see very deep dive demos and some great startup showcases about how we did this. We'll also have a great session by Microsoft Mechanics that will show you how Microsoft itself built the Microsoft 365 Copilot. So you get a lot of ideas and inspiration about how to take this and build your own first Copilot. So I want to close up with something that I think is really important to understand at this point. Startups are aiming to build a great product. One thing that is crucial to remember, the model is not your product. So don't think about building into ChatGPT or GPT-4. Those are just enablers for something else, for a new platform to emerge, for a new model and architecture to emerge. What you're actually trying to do with the model is what makes sense. And this is up to you to create those great experiences, those experiences that are infusing some of what AI can do and some of what users can do, infuse them together and make sure that your users feel more comfortable with your application. They are more productive with what you're offering. And while you're adding complexity to your APIs and to your IPs, you're not pushing that complexity onto your users. They don't need to learn anything new to start using your new features. They only need to think it, say it, and then that's what happens. That's the idea of Copilot. So if you haven't signed up to Microsoft for Startups Founders Hub just yet, and you want to start building on all of those cool things, as I mentioned throughout the keynote, startups.microsoft.com, sign up to Microsoft for Startups and start using this. Founders Hub also has a lot of great tools for building software like Visual Studio and GitHub, and also some benefits in OpenAI for you to start exploring it. And obviously everything that you've seen across Azure AI, including Azure OpenAI. And I'll finish with some sentence that Kevin Scott, our CTO, actually told most of the builders to do, so I'll feel comfortable in saying it as well. Please do legendary shit with this, because this is really, really disruptive and amazing technology. Thank you so much, and hope you'll have a great Discovery Day as part of our Microsoft for Startups program.
Fantastic. So now we are ready for our next speaker with Amit Swarzenberg, as he will be presenting Azure AI Basic, Meet the Playground.
Amit Schwarzenberg, and I want to talk to you about the basics. So we're going to talk a lot about Copilot and how it can be built for your own application and your own startup. But how do you get started? So not some of you are very familiar with Azure, but not with Azure OpenAI, and some of you are coming from other cloud services. So let's do a quick dive on one-on-one on what does it mean to work on Azure. So we'll learn how to open an Azure OpenAI resource at the beginning and what model should I choose, how to create a system prompt, and how to fine-tune the model with a Fusion. So this is Azure, and this is the website. Okay, so let's see how we can open a resource. So choose Azure OpenAI and press Create, and then we'll need to choose your subscription. And in Azure, we have a resource group, so you need to choose and create a new resource group, and select the region that is the closest to your customers. Currently, there are 4 regions, and we are deploying new regions all the time. You need to choose a name and the pricing tier. There is only one pricing tier right now. It's standard S0, and press next, next, next. I'm not going to do it right now. I'm going to use a pre-deployed resource because it's take 2 to 3 minutes, and I want to save time. So you will now be able to go to Azure OpenAI Studio. You open the studio, and then we're going to choose a model. So OpenAI has a few models. So the main models are ChatGPT 3.5. This is the default ChatGPT, or GPT 3.5 Turbo, and GPT-4. In order to get access to GPT-4, you need to file a form. It's supposed to be easier by the end of the year, but currently you need to fill a form before getting access to GPT-4. But GPT-3.5 is good enough for most of your application. So now let's go to the chat, and now that we have a deployment, we can actually use it for a quick demo. So we can write which system message that we want, but I'm using the template of an Xbox customer support agent, and I'm going to change it into Azure customer support agent. Super easy. So you're an Azure customer support agent whose primary goal is to help users with issues they experience with their Xbox devices. You're friendly and concise. You only provide actual answers to queries and do not provide answers that are not related to, let's change it to Azure. Okay, great. Let's do a quick reading that I didn't forget to change anything. You're an Azure customer support. Goal is to, okay, I see that I need to change the Xbox to Azure services. And all you need to do right now is just save the changes in order to deploy it. Okay, it's super easy. This is called a system prompt or zero shot. But if I want to make it more precise, I will give him an example how to answer a question. For example, how much is AWS? So if someone will ask a question like that, I will tell him to answer, I apologize, but I do not have information about the prices of other cloud services, such as AWS. Let me fix it. My primary goal is to assist with issues regarding Azure services. Is there any specific issues that you're having with your Azure account that I might be able to help with? Okay, so now I show him also, this is called a few shot. I also show him how to answer complex questions, and you can answer about any question that I will ask him just by looking on one example. So I saved, I deployed, and now I can ask him very, very complex questions. So now I'm going to close the system prompt, and I'm going to choose a deployment. Okay, if you remember, I have two deployments. One is GPT-3.5, and the second is GPT-4. Okay, and you can see the input tokens down here. This is the number of tokens. ChatGPT 2 was 4,000 tokens. Now there is also a 60,000 version. And I'm going to choose the parameters. So the max response of 350 words or tokens is not enough. So every token is about 0.75 words. So I'm increasing the max response. And you see the temperature is how much you can hallucinate or how much you can invent new and unrelated topics. So because I want to build a customer support, I'm going to leave it in 0. And now we can start chatting with him. So I will ask him how to upload a VM. Okay, and he'll give me the answer. And I can also ask him for a more sophisticated question. For example, what is the relevant code for uploading Azure? So I can get the CLI code. So in 2 minutes, we have created a chatbot on Azure that can also code and create answers and help your users. But you want to use your own data. And let's see the next level, how easy it is. Okay, to also incorporate the data that you have on your startup or your customers. So if, for example, you are a startup that deals with renewable energies, this is a very difficult question that you want to know. For example, how much renewable sources expected and actual in 2022. So you need your customer or your own data, and you need to upload them into Azure and then use Azure OpenAI to get an answer. So you want a short answer. You don't want to hallucinate or create answers that are not correct. So let's see how we can do it. So if we want to infuse our data or your customer data, we need to understand what is embedding and how to use Azure Storage and Cognitive Search to index your data and how to display it in your web app. So it's super simple. Let's see it. So we're taking the data and we need to index it or embed it in generative AI terms. and you can take any data that you want. You can use any service. I really recommend Azure Cognitive Search, and then it will index the data. And after you have an index data, you can query it with Azure OpenAI. Now let's see a quick demo of how you can bring your own data. So let's go into the chat. And instead of the default system message, you're an AI assistant that help people find information, let's change it that you're an AI assistant that help people play Catan. Okay, let's save the changes. And now let's add our own data. So we need to add data sources. So let's choose upload file because it's the easiest one. And you need to build a blob storage. You can always create a new blob storage. Super easy, super simple. Okay, and you just need to choose the subscription, the resource group, and give it a name, and you're ready to go. Also, a cognitive search resource. This is the one is going to index your data, or embed your data. So here it's again super easy, but I recommend you to use the standard tier and not the free tier while using Azure OpenAI Search, cognitive search. So now that we have both of the resources, we can choose them and we can deploy them. Let's write Catan and let's deploy it. We need to upload the files. So very quickly, I can use the Catan base rule, upload the file. Next, save and close. So now it will take time to deploy, but because I don't want to waste your time, I've already created a demo. So now once the data is uploaded, you can see it here. And now I can ask him, what are the rules? Okay. And if I ask him what are the rules, he will go only into my documents. Why is that? Because I limit the response only for the data in the content. I can also uncheck this, and you'll be able to get more information from the LLMs. But you see the reference here? This is what's really nice about it. That it's not only giving you a response from your pages, it's a 47 pages long rule book. You can go and see what are the pages that he actually chose to use. Okay, but if you want to give it to your customer, you can press deploy into a new web app, give it a name, use the subscription, choose the region and the price plan. Once you deploy it, it will look like that. And now your users can start chat with it. You can share with them the website. Super easy to build an OpenAI with your own data. And that's me. Thank you, everybody. Have a great sessions, and there are going to be more advanced techniques in how to build a full live Copilot session. So stay with us. Thank you very much.
Great. And now we have the last session before the break. So we will have Steve Struman on Build Your First Startup Copilot with Azure AI Studio and ChatGPT 4.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session where we get to talk to you about harnessing the power of generative AI with Azure AI. Now, I am sure that you have all heard about generative AI and seen the incredible opportunity that you have to harness this power and build amazing things. And we are just as excited at Microsoft as well. In fact, you have seen us announce so many copilots, so many capabilities using the power of generative AI to enhance enhance search with things like Big Chat, to enhance the way that you write code with GitHub Copilot, to enhance the way that you build and interact with information in your enterprise with Microsoft 365 Copilot, to change the way that you think about security with Microsoft Security Copilot, and on and on. And one of the amazing things that I'm going to talk to you about today is how to build your own Copilot using the same foundation, the same tools, and the same capabilities that all of these copilots share. That's right. Every single one of these copilots actually run on the same Azure machine learning platform using the same capabilities that I'm going to talk to you about today. So when you do want to build your own copilot, what's involved in that? What is the architecture stack of that copilot? So let me start by introducing that to you. You know, you've got a session later on where you'll be hearing about how to build an incredibly user-friendly front end to your copilot, how to make it extensible, and how to design the user experience in a way that's natural and that's interactive. Where I'm going to be focusing on today is that middle layer of the copilot stack. And that middle layer of the copilot stack really has 4 key capabilities that we're going to be unpacking for you. So at the top layer of that capability is the actual prompt that comes from the end consumer of the application you're building. As it goes through any kind of response filtering capabilities that you'll want to put in place to ensure that it is aligned, to ensure that it is safe, and that it is appropriate for your environment. Then that prompt with its filter will go into the meta prompt or the prompt instructions. These are the instructions that actually tell the underlying foundation model what to do with that prompt. So if you have a question, do you want to answer it? If you have a document, do you want to summarize it? If you have a piece of code, do you want to generate more code? What is it that you're wanting that model to do? That's in the meta prompt instructions. Now, the magic of bringing your own copilot is that you want those prompt and instructions to actually operate on your own data. We call that grounding. You want to actually ensure that that model is responding out of the data context that you're providing it, not out of its memory of trained information. And you might want to do more than just respond. You actually might want to execute your own custom code in the form of a plugin with that. So how do you actually do that? How do you actually orchestrate all of those capabilities? How have we done that with the copilots that we build at Microsoft? We do all of that on our stack. So I'm going to be showing you how to do that. But before I show you, I want to introduce the core capabilities that I'm going to be demonstrating for you today. The first is our Azure OpenAI service. This is the service that enables you to interact with the most powerful models, generative models currently available on the market today, in a way that is secure and compliant, ensuring that your data is securely stored within your context, within your subscription, using all of the tools that you want to use, whether that's LangChain or semantic kernel or any other tools. And you have access here to the latest models like GPT-3.5, GPT-4, Codex, DALL-E image generation models, and you can bring your own data to that. You can also customize that. And I'm going to be showing you how to customize those capabilities with your own data and with your own prompts. And this is the piece where you add your own differentiation. So you're not going to be changing the foundation models in the demo today, but you are going to be bringing your own data in the form of an index, a search index. Could be Azure Cognitive Search. It could be an open source search index that you can actually provide your own both structured and unstructured data to answer questions of which the GPT model has no clue about. And we do that using Azure Machine Learning. And within Azure Machine Learning, I'm going to be showing you some core capabilities that allow you to work with both the OpenAI models as well as open source models if you want to, and we have those available as well as prompt engineering capabilities and responsible AI. So let me click one level deeper and talk to each about those. So I'm going to be showing you Azure Machine Learning prompt, the model catalog first, actually, before prompt flow. The model catalog is the catalog of models that we have curated and made available to you, including all of the OpenAI models, as well as open source models like Llama 2, and many, many more models that you can work with to create your application. The way you actually create your application is within prompt flow. Prompt flow has 4 key capabilities. The first thing is that it securely orchestrates within the environment within Azure OpenAI. So that means that we will take care of all of the security, the key, the storage, and the APIs for you. You don't have to create your own separate key vault environment and worry about managing all those keys and those connections. We take care of that for you. Second is that we support prompt tuning and experimentation. You know, the prompt engineering process is a highly iterative one where you will give an instruction, you will test it, then you will give another instruction and you'll test it, and you want to do that over and over again. Third, as we support deployments, including blue-green deployments that allow you to flight your application with its changes to the endpoints and allow you to load balance traffic and monitor the quality of those traffics. And then fourth, we allow you to use whatever orchestration environment under the covers or chaining environment that you want to use, including semantic kernel, LangChain, and plugins out of the box. Now, the last thing I want to talk to you about before we go to the demo is just the importance of working with these systems responsibly. We've all seen way too many examples where prompts and models that were built and applications that were built were actually attacked by malicious users, and people have tried to make these things say things that are inappropriate. So we provide safety out of the box in the form of Azure Content Safety. And this is automatically built in for you, meaning every prompt input that goes into the system is being filtered for hate speech, for sexual speech, for violence, and for self-harm. And we're also providing templates for you to ensure that the system is accurate, it's relevant, and it's grounded. So now that I've talked to you about all of these capabilities, how about I actually show you how to do this? So now what you can see in front of you is the Azure Machine Learning Studio. But before I go into that, let me actually talk to you a little bit about Azure OpenAI and show you how the components that I talked to you about actually look in the real world. So here in the real world, what you see is the playground for Azure OpenAI. And I'm just talking to one of my deployments here, which is a deployment of GPT-3.5 Turbo. And I can ask questions in this deployment, simple questions about information, but it might not have the answer. For example, I'm going to ask, what is prompt flow? Now remember, ChatGPT was trained on data in around 2020, 2021. And so it's going to give a generic response based on its knowledge. I haven't added any knowledge to this. And let's talk about prompt flow being some sort of a sequence of prompts that are working together. It knows nothing about the product. Now, within that, you'll see that I also have this system instruction. This is the meta prompt instruction, and it's just a default instruction that describes how to do this. So that's an out-of-the-box experience. What if I wanted to bring my own data? What if I wanted to bring additional information into it? So this is where Azure Machine Learning comes to play. So the first capability that I talked to you about within Azure Machine Learning was the model catalog. The model catalog is the place where we have all of the models available to you, including Llama 2 and Falcon and OpenAI models that you can actually work with. Now, this automatically syncs with Azure OpenAI, and it knows which models I have access to based on my subscription capabilities. So it knows I have access to GPT-4, GPT-3.5 Turbo. And within this, I can actually see the capabilities of the model, and I can go ahead and use it directly within prompt flow. Well, I actually want to take you over to prompt flow so I can explain a little bit more to you about what prompt flow is and how it works. So prompt flow is our orchestration tool that allows you to create rapidly, using a set of template capabilities, your own applications where you can bring your own data, where you can search the internet, and where you can also evaluate the prompts that you have. Now, let me explain evaluation. I'm going to come back to it. But this kind of evaluation is truly, truly special, because what we're doing is we're actually using a GPT model to evaluate your application given a set of instructions for the metrics that we're describing here. So for example, this evaluation context will evaluate your model for groundedness against the context. Now, I'm introducing a lot to you, but I'm going to come back to that, so keep that one in mind. So if I want to create my own GPT, my own chat with my own enterprise data, I will actually start with bring your own data, where I can actually go in and bring my own data either using Azure Cognitive Search or using an open source FIAS vector index database. And all I need to be able to do is I need to have security within my environment. I need to have access to the data store, and I can go ahead and create this. For the sake of time, I've actually created one earlier. So let's take a look at that one. So this is the same prompt flow that I just showed you. So let me actually take you through the core components of this prompt flow, of this application. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take the question, and I just have a sample question here, but when the application is actually published, you'll get the question from the user. And we're going to actually create a vector of that question using Azure OpenAI's text embedding service or text embedding model. And again, this is a model that I already have access to. I had already created it. If for any reason I didn't have access to it already, I could actually add another connection here, and I could go ahead and connect to a different model. But in this case, like I said, I already have that, so I don't need to do that. So the next thing that we're going to do is once we've embedded the question, I'm going to go ahead and search my vector index for that question. Now, at this point, you might be saying, well, hold on a second. Where did that vector index come from? And that would be a really good question. So I'm going to pop out. I'm going to show you what happened behind the scenes. So you'll see that this vector index actually is also available here. And it's this index that I'm playing with, which is an Azure Data Index. And if I wanted to create a new index, it would be as simple as actually just going in here, creating an index, and dragging my own files and folders in and choosing what kind of index that I wanted that to be. And it would go ahead and create that index for me, again, using either an open source data store or an Azure Cognitive Search store. So that's one of the key capabilities that I'm using within my flow. The creation wizard would have done that for us as well. So the next thing I'm doing here is I'm taking that input and I'm searching the index, and I'm going to get a set of output information from that, which is just a vector output of the information. So now I actually want to store that in a format effectively as a document that I can pass to Azure OpenAI to query over. Now, the best way to actually demonstrate what's happening here is I actually like to jump over to Bing for a moment and show you what happens when you use the Bing chat experience. So if I use the Bing chat experience and I ask a question like, what is Azure ML prompt flow? What's happening in the back end is a two-stage process. The first stage is it's going and taking my question, it's creating a vector index, and it's doing a search of the internet for that index. And that search will retrieve a bunch of web sources. It's then going to pass those web sources to Azure OpenAI, and Azure OpenAI is doing a summarization task. It's actually taking all of that information and it's summarizing it, and it's returning to me that information in a simple form. So you can see these are the websites that it chose to use. There were 4 websites, and it cited my sources, and it summarized that information. Well, I'm doing the exact same thing here within this. I'm doing the search. I'm passing the outputted information from that search, which is a huge blob of text from different sources. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to summarize that using Azure OpenAI. Now, before I summarize that, remember we have a set of system instructions. These system instructions are the way that you tell the system what to do. So let's read this. My first system instruction says, you are an AI assistant that helps users answer questions giving a specific context. You will be given the context from the search above, and you want to ask the question based only on that context. This is me grounding the answer. Please cite the source afterwards. That's the instructions. Now you'll see here that I actually have 2 variants. And so if I show my variants here, you'll actually see I have a slightly different variant. Now in this variant, I'm also wanting to ensure that I'm not passing any personally identifiable information from my search index over to the answer. And so I have this additional set of instructions that talks about preserving privacy. I wonder which one is going to be better, the first one, which is my default one, or the second one. Well, I'll test that in a moment here. So I'm going to use those instructions together with the output of the search and with the input question from the user to actually generate a response. And if I see, you'll actually see that there is an output being run for that. So let me go ahead and run this flow. And when I hit run, you'll see that it's going ahead and taking my one input question, what is Azure Machine Learning? And it's going to step through every one of these steps and generate the output. So we'll let that run here just for a second. Now, while that's running, one of the things that I want to come back to is how do I evaluate the quality of this thing? Like, it's okay for me to run it just one time and see whether or not the output response was something that I see is appropriate, and it's got an answer for me. But that's not really a good test. So really what I want to do is I actually want to run a bulk test. And a bulk test allows me to iteratively improve this thing. And this is something that we can do in PromptFlow that you can't do anywhere else. Right now, this is a capability that's very unique. Now, if I were to test this thing, if you think about how to test any language model, there's really three approaches. The first approach is that I have a curated set of ground truth questions and answers. In other words, I have a bunch of questions, and maybe I've paid some people to go and write what the appropriate answer is for every one of those questions. And then I can use something like F1 accuracy or BERT score to actually compare the generated question and answer with the ground truth question answer. But that's very expensive and it's limited in scale based on your budget. So the second thing that I can do is I can have people actively scoring. I can give a set of criteria and I can ask questions and I can ask people to score the answers of the generated responses. And you'll often see that in the form of thumbs up, thumbs down that you see in, applications of people saying, yes, this is good or not good. But that again is limited to the number of users you have testing it. So this is where we're doing something truly magic here. What I'm actually doing here is I have a data set of questions that I'm asking, and I'm actually going to pass that, and I'm going to evaluate it based on groundedness and coherence scores using another prompt flow. And that prompt flow is actually going to use Azure OpenAI and the instructions that I'm passing Azure OpenAI to evaluate how well grounded and how coherent that is. Now, let me unpack what these are. Groundedness is simply asking, is the generated answer able to be found in the source search context? In other words, did the model make up the answer, or did it actually summarize it from the source? The coherence is actually looking at how readable is the answer. The most grounded answer in the world would be a one-word answer. But of course, that wouldn't be very coherent. So let me go ahead and run this. And it's going to run through those questions and answers. Now, for the sake of time, I'm actually going to go to one that I ran a little bit earlier here. And you can actually see that up here. So I've actually got the questions and answers, and the output is currently running, and you can see it's running this question as well as the evaluation here that is currently running. Now, let me jump over to another one that I ran earlier that has a whole bunch of different questions and answers built into it. So in this example that I have here, I can actually see the completed runs that I have done, and I can see all of the bulk tests. And with each of these bulk tests, I can see that I have 3 variants. And for each one of those variants, I'm actually doing an aggregate scoring of the quality of this answer. So you can see I have 2 scores, one for groundedness and one for coherence. And across the 3 variants, I'm showing you the average score of all of the questions, as well as the pass rate. And I've set the pass rate here, I think, to be 90%. So to be 4 out of 5. So of the number of questions, what percentage of questions got more than a 4 out of 5? And what is interesting is you can see that actually my first variant here has, actually I think it's my second variant, has the most grounded and the most coherent response. And so now I can actually go back into that flow and I can actually set the specific variant as default. So in this case, I have 3 variants. Remember, as variant number 2 was the best variant. So I can set that as default. And now when I go ahead and deploy this, it'll deploy using that set of instructions to my endpoint. And so deployment is as easy as this. I just go in, I choose the endpoint that I want to deploy it to, and I make sure that the output is mapped. And I actually don't need to include the output in the response. I just want to include the answer. I ensure that I've got all of my connections set up for the deployment. And I can choose how many instances that I want. And I can click deploy. And as easy as that, my application will be deployed to an endpoint that I can go ahead and begin to test as well as to monitor. And that endpoint is an Azure machine learning endpoint. We're also going to be, in the near future, enabling you to deploy it as a container where you can actually take it out to your own endpoint or connect to something like Azure App Service if you actually want to run it that way. And so these are the endpoints that I have here. And you can see that that endpoint is now up and running and it's fully deployed. So it's available for me right here. And these are the GPT endpoints as well. So let me go back and summarize really, really quickly everything that I've just showed you in this demo. So we just built your own ChatGPT. And your own ChatGPT was able to actually go through and, with Azure ML, build a vector database to search that database and to actually bring a result from your data. And we demonstrated that in roughly 15 minutes, which is pretty phenomenal. And that's because it's all based around this core engine that we call Azure ML Prompt Flow. And that Azure ML Prompt Flow gives you all the abilities to actually execute these capabilities within a flow environment. Now, one of the things that I didn't show you that I should have actually shown you is the ability to bring your own custom plugins or tools. So you can actually add to those templates your own custom Python code where you can actually execute that as well. And I also wanted to inform you that we will be announcing later this month the ability to interact with Azure ML Prompt Flow purely from an SDK as well. So if you're more used to working with Azure ML Prompt Flow from Visual Studio, you can do that too. And you can actually work entirely within a Visual Studio environment instead of being stuck within the Azure Machine Learning environment. So that was a very fast capability. And so what do you do next? The biggest thing that I would say is you should all have access to Azure credits. And those credits should allow you to work with Azure ML Prompt Flow. The amazing thing is Azure ML itself, there is no cost for. The only thing you're paying for is you're paying for the tokens that you're using to call Azure OpenAI, and you're paying for the compute that you're using to run the prompt flow environment. And so you can start building and playing with your own environment today using these capabilities that are in public preview. And so you should all have access to those capabilities as well. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Steve. So I would like to thank Adir, Amit, and Steve for their presentations. And as we told you, you have a 5 minute break now. So just relax, take a coffee, or just wait 5 minutes, and we will see you in 5 minutes for the other 3 sessions. Thank you. Hi there. So we are back now to have finally our startup showcase with AI Copilot in action. So you're going to have Arnon from Hour One, Jill from Blink Ops, and Corey from Synthetic, moderated by Rob, who is our head of AI at Microsoft for Startups.
So now that we've learned a little bit about building your own co-pilots, it's always incredible to hear from people who've actually done it. And so I'm incredibly excited to get to talk to 3 different founders and their experience actually making co-pilots. And so we have Gil from Blink, Corey from Synthetic, and Arnon from Hour One, all who have had this experience of embracing this brand new technology and actually trying to get it shipped out to customers. So I'd love to start with Gil and understand your demo and everything about what it's been like building a Copilot.
Sure. So quick introduction. I'm Gil. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of Blink. This is actually my second startup. My first company was security company, which got acquired by Palo Alto Networks. And at Palo Alto, I got to see some of the world that we're focused on, which is security automation. And we are about a company that's running for about 2.5 years. And when we started the company, our goal was to build a platform for customers to automate their security tasks and workflows. And back when we started the company, copilots and LLMs were not a mainstream thing. And so we did not have them implemented within Blink. And so we started by building a low-code, no-code platform, which is very easy to use, like drag and drop steps and build your workflow as you wish. The problem with that was that while it was easy to build the workflows, you had to know by heart the APIs and the specific actions that you needed to combine in order to actually build a functioning workflow. And so about 9 months ago, we started using initially OpenAI and then started working with Microsoft to introduce Copilot, Blink Copilot as part of the product. And while we initially did it for marketing purposes, it became so powerful that we actually changed the entire product to be AI-driven. And so today what Blink is, it is a hyper-automation Copilot assistant, which as long as you can say or type the task or workflow that you want to automate, we can do it for you. And so what that looks like, and I actually can show this live. Okay, so this is Blink. This is our product. And as I mentioned, we're focusing on automating security workflows. And so as long as I can type the prompt that I want to automate, for example, I have one out of time, on whenever a new malware alert pops up, in this case from Microsoft Defender, if the alert is critical, I want to isolate the endpoint using Defender, I want to send a message to the security team over Microsoft Teams, and then I want to open a ticket in ServiceNow. All I had to do was type this. In the past, I had to understand exactly which APIs, which actions, how to use them. With this, all I have to do is press generate, and then typically between 5 to 10 seconds on average, Blink generates a functioning workflow. And let's give it a few seconds. There you go. And as you can see here on the right side, in pretty small, it generated what we call a low-code workflow of this use case. So let's just jump in. Let's press create. Oops, sorry. I can zoom in here. And so what you're seeing here is a alert coming from, and so this, oh, there you go. Sorry, delayed. A alert coming from a third-party trigger. So basically this workflow listens for new incoming alerts from Microsoft Defender, and then gets the alerts, checks if it's critical, isolates the endpoint using Defender, sends a message to security team over Teams, opens a ticket in ServiceNow, and because this is the LLM building this is the AI building the workflow for you, it even created a placeholder for what happens if it's not critical. And so building this workflow, which is a very popular and common workflow in the security team space, typically takes between hours or days and requires a engineer level expertise to build a workflow. With Blink, this took 30 seconds. And the cool thing is that combining that prompting capability with a low-code editor. So at this point, now that I have the workflow, I can actually customize it. So let me zoom in. So for example, let's see the message that is going to send. This time it's passing in a dynamic parameter that you can send. Now let's say that I wanted to, in between these or in the ticket, it sends the ticket. Now let's say that I wanted to, for example, also send a Slack message. All I have to do is here on the left side, you see all the integrations that we support. All I had to do was type Slack, find the specific step that I want to use, send message, I guess, drop it here. And now we have another step called send message to Slack, right? And so this combination of starting from a prompt, creating a low-code workflow, being able to customize it, and then also having Copilot next to me, which I can have it change things on the fly. This is something that has never existed before, at least not in the world of security. And this changed the way we sell the product completely, because initially this was a product that was focused on technical engineers, and now it's accessible to any security practitioners, no matter what skill set they have. As long as they know what they want to automate, they can just ask Blink Copilot to do it, and it will do it for them. So that's very high level Blink.
Well, that's awesome. I mean, one of the very first questions I have for you was, it looks like there's just a ton of services that you're able to pull from. Was it difficult to teach a Copilot to work with all those different kinds of services?
Initially, it was a bit challenging because it has this tendency to hallucinate stuff. And so when we were working with OpenAI initially, the problem was it was making up steps and actions that never existed. So we had to train it or fine-tune it to only use the integrations that we already support, and then each one of them train it on how it's best used. So for sometimes, for example, you want to query something from, let's say, Splunk or from some third-party vendor or from a database. So training it to perfect the specific steps, the specific actions, that took a lot of effort. But once we've established the limits and how it should build it, it did a really fantastic job. And just to emphasize, this thing you see here, this is actually a YAML file, and this is what the AI generates.
Oh, awesome. And so the output after you've gone through this is a YAML file that then you could go through and maybe check into source control and be able to go through and understand all of the different aspects of your how security is working in your organization.
Correct. And what we've done is we've done a lot of pre and post processing to make sure that whatever is generated works and is functioning. And so that's why when you see it running for 10 seconds, sometimes it retries a few things. But the end result is within 10, 20 seconds, you get something
that's amazing. As a CTO, one of the biggest challenges I had was that I had lots of staff who didn't necessarily have any security training before starting a position. This looks like an incredible way for people to actually learn what's important to your organization and actually be able to go through and start understanding what your security posture looks like and what's important. Have you found that teams have started collaborating with the system?
Yes. In fact, if I go back here, part of what we've done is we've created a security library that customers can then use to share workflows they've built. So we see this both internally within organizations where different teams, not just security, DevOps and IT collaborate, but also across companies where they share things they've built, and then we publish them here on the Blink automation library, and then we categorize them based on areas. So for example, if you went to, for example, I don't know, even not security, even if you went to compliance and governance, for example. So there's a lot of different workflows that people have generated and shared. So it's very quickly becoming a community effort.
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges that people building Copilots for the first time ask is, hey, what if I don't know what prompts to ask? And so right here, you've actually already started this whole, here are the best prompts that you might consider and things that might be important to your organization. And I even see a feature list here.
Yes. And this is something that is growing and improving, and hopefully one day will become the place where everybody goes.
So now you mentioned that initially there was a little bit of struggle with hallucinations. Now that you've worked through some of the fine tuning, how do you continue to work with that? And is it still as big a problem as you were initially encountering?
So I would say that what we've seen is that the more we limited it to hallucinate less, the better result we got. But sometimes when it wasn't able to address something, it would just fail. So we've created this mechanism where it tries to do something with a set level of limitations and temperature, and then as the customer wants to have to retry, basically, let's say it created a step not in the best way, then you can ask it to retry, and then it's going to increase the hallucination level. So we found that the balance between not trying to fully automate it, but trying to do an initial automation, get a result like you see here, and then have a user interact with it, that was the best approach. And at the end of the day, whether it takes a second or 60 seconds, it's the same time from a customer's perspective or from a practitioner's perspective. So that's what we saw as the best outcome.
That's really interesting. As when working with security engineers in the past, one of the troubles that we always ran into is there was always more ideas of things that we might need to be able to cover than we were actually able to get to in a reasonable way. How do you think that this might change the future of how people build security teams?
I think one of the biggest problems in security is that there's, I think, over 3 million open positions right now. Many in the US. This AI plus automation is something that will not only make it possible, and that's how we see it. Our vision is every single person, every single security or IT practitioner will essentially have a Copilot next to them that lets them do 10 to 100 to even 1,000 times more than they can do today. And so if you take that and you look 5 years from now, every organization, no matter what size, will now be able to operate security at scale. And I think that's something that has not been possible until 2023. It's something that is for the industry, I think it's revolutionary.
Yeah, absolutely. Both for security professionals as well as AI professionals, it always seems as though there's much, much more demand than people who can work on it. But in many other fields where it would just be, what if I had those kind of super goggles, the ability to go through and see a lot more of the world at once? Feels like you've really extended the toolkit of people who are already working.
I think the best feedback we've received from customers was, before we introduced Copilot, the question was, okay, how many people do I have to allocate to operate Blink? The question we get now is, okay, this seems too easy. How do I prevent my people from destroying the company by building the wrong workflow? So how can you put guardrails? And so we added publishing and approval steps. It completely changed the dynamic.
Yeah, I would give you a similar story from my own career of when people discovered how awesome Python notebooks were. All of a sudden, I had lots of people who were experimenting in Python notebooks and wanted to check them into production. And we had to say, this is an incredible way to learn the system, but we still need code review. And so maybe code review for a little bit longer.
Correct.
Well, are there any other lessons learned that you would tell people who are trying to adopt a technology like this for the first time?
I think the one thing that is most surprising to me was when we started is not to try to think about it as everything, but try to combine it with whatever value proposition or solution you're trying to achieve. In our case, it was automating security. and let the human, at least in my opinion, in most cases, let the human still be part of it. And I'll try to have like one click solve everything. And I think that combination, at least for the foreseeable future, seems to be, in my opinion, the way to go.
Well, I found your story really inspiring, especially the fact that it pivoted your entire company embracing this new technology. I hope that inspires a lot of other people to try it out.
Thank you.
I'd love to move on to Corey so that we can make sure that we get a chance to talk with everybody. So Corey, maybe you could tell us a little bit about Synthetic.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So I'm Corey Jaskolski. I'm the founder of Synthetic. And Synthetic envisions AI, building image-based AI models in a very different way. And it actually grew out of my frustration that stems all the way back to grad school at MIT more than 20 years ago now. Wow. But basically, when I started grad school for AI, I thought this is an incredible field. It's going to make us as humans better at what we do. It's going to make us able to focus on the things we need to focus to and automate the tedious, error-prone, time-consuming tasks. But when you start to build a imagery-based AI, what you realize is the traditional approach is to label millions of images by hand, drawing boxes around the things you want to find in what turns out to be a tedious, time-consuming, error-prone human task. So I was really frustrated with it, throughout grad school, and that frustration remained into my professional career, where one of my first jobs was actually as an explorer at National Geographic. Yes, that's as cool as it sounds. I worked on the deck of Titanic. I 3D scanned Mount Everest by helicopter to look at vegetation growth with up the side of Everest, and worked in the Congo on anti-poaching using camera systems to try to detect what weapons poachers were carrying and try to identify poacher encampments and the like from aerial scans. But there too, it was, how do you label millions of images to really get all you can out of an AI in order to teach that supervised AI to do things? So we built Synthetic to try to answer the question, what if you didn't do that? What if you didn't use any labeling? What if you used some of the tricks of the trade in generative AI and the foundational unsupervised AIs like large language models? What could you really do? So what we built is a tool that allows you to actually explore data in a human-machine collaboration and drive those insights from AI without having to label data, without having to have a big data science and AI team, although some of our customers still do. But I can switch over to the demo here and show you what we do. There we go. So our tool set is called Rake, and effectively it's a good way to think about it is a copilot for imagery. So I can go into either full motion video or still imagery or maps. And I'll go into maps here, and I will go to some high resolution data of Milwaukee, where we're headquartered. And this data set across Milwaukee is really high resolution. So this is 3-inch aerial resolution. And if I wanted to build an AI model across this to try to find something like all of the swimming pools or all of the trucks with garbage in the back of them or all of the dumpsters, whatever that might be, I would traditionally crawl across this data set with human labelers. And this might take thousands of labelers, weeks or months in order to label this data set. Might cost millions of dollars to label a data set like this if we're doing large scale labeling across multiple different classes. But with Rake, we can do something quite a bit different. I'll find something that I know where it is here. It's such a big data set. I remember from previous demos that there is a dumpster in a yard over here. Here we go. So there's no pre-trained model and no labeled data on the back end. All I've got to do is draw a box around something that I'm looking for, like this dumpster. And the way this works is actually a reasonably good analogy is ChatGPT. With ChatGPT, if you ask it to write you a song about a muskrat that lives in a lake in Wisconsin but wants to travel the world, it doesn't know what those English language words mean. It doesn't know what sentence structure is. It doesn't know that a song should rhyme, but it's mapped all of those words and relationships between those words. In GPT, they call it tokenizing, but it's mapped those into a mathematical space. And then when you're typing a question, you're really querying that mathematical space and getting a response. Well, here with Rake, what we've done is we've queried with pixels. We've actually asked the question of the Rake space, which is another different mathematical space, with these pixels. It's mapped it into the mathematical space, and now it's searching across all these millions of map tiles in Milwaukee for something that looks similar to what we've queried with. And what it's going to return back is, again, kind of analogous to ChatGPT. Instead of a single answer, though, it's going to return 1,024 answers that, with a human-machine collaboration, we can guide it to the sorts of things that we're looking for and improve this over time. This is a really powerful way to think about it, this human-machine collaboration. We've actually been able to do things like ingest the entire surface area of Earth and do searches across 18 trillion pixels. Most famously, we found the Chinese balloon after it was popped off the coast of the United States, and trace it back to its origin. So here you can see Rake provides what we call a context map. It shows us things that are self-similar, which are in fact, in this case, these dumpsters, and shows us things that are less similar, but also related. So these are, in a lot of cases, trucks with things in the back of them, which you could see why it might think was similar to the dumpster. But with Rake, all you've got to do with this human-machine interaction is you select this polygon tool, and you select the things that look similar to what you're looking for. Rake has clumped them together or clustered them so that it makes it pretty easy to do this. And you don't got to get them all. It's just about teaching Rake the sorts of things that it's looking for, so you can iterate through this process. And so this was our traditional way of running Rake. We can go ahead and find dumpsters, throughout the area, throughout Wisconsin, or throughout Milwaukee in this case. And again, it doesn't find them all. It's a nudge. It's a human machine nudge, and then you iterate through this process. And you can build an AI right in this tool, or you can actually iterate through this until you find all of the things that you're looking for. But this led to a very interesting problem or interesting question. What you saw is that I drew a box on a dumpster in order to find the dumpster. Well, the world doesn't always work like that. What if I want to find something that I haven't seen before, yet I can describe? So what we can do there is we actually have a way to access this with natural language by seeding a DALL-E prompt. So I can type something like, show me a top-down aerial image of a chalk drawing of the United States map. Every state is in a different color. So I'm thinking like a kid's playground drawing of a United States map. So I'm going to hit generate, and DALL-E is going to generate an image based on that text. And this image is going to be high resolution. It's not actually going to look like a great chalk drawing that might be on a playground, that might be in black and white or the like, but it's going to produce a drawing like this. So what I can do from here is I can go ahead and I'm going to crop some of this black background out to make it a little easier for Rake. And I'm going to go ahead and kick off a search. And what this has done now is taken this completely generative imaginary image that was seeded by natural language in order to generate this DALL-E image. And now it's searching all of Rake space. And here we're searching Milwaukee, but we can do this across entire countries worth of satellite data, or tens or hundreds of thousands of hours of full motion video, or billions of images. One of the really big strengths of Rake is, like ChatGPT, since it's got things mapped into this mathematical space, querying that is super fast. We can, again, search across an entire country of China, for example, in just a few minutes, and build an AI that will run across millions of images a minute when it's already mapped into Rake space. But what we'll get back from this is, hopefully, we'll get back some things that look like chalk drawings, and this will guide us to find the chalk drawings across playgrounds or on sidewalks or alleyways throughout Milwaukee. And again, this works for anything. That's really been the crux of it. The big strength of it for us is that since you can search for anything, instead of just having a way for people to find stuff in the map, we had to give people a way to find anything. And that's really what the natural language processing modality does here. And I'll zoom around here. And sure enough, Rake clusters things together by self-similarity. So these were things that Rake said, hey, are these the sorts of things you're looking for? And they indeed are. And they're clustered together. I'll skip this one that it only got half of. And I'll go ahead and close this loop. And what we'll see is that we have found the playground drawings of the United States map. And you can see how very different it is than this. The interesting thing is being able to map from this domain into Rake space and finding something that's radically different than this. Yet still, it will skip things like the world map because it doesn't look enough like our initial query, nor our human-guided nudge there in this human-machine collaboration. So that's what Rake does, and that's how we use natural language processing and generative tools like DALL-E to seed Rake.
So incredible. You combined both computer vision and generative AI to create your search in this multidimensional space, using multidimensional spaces, no less, and then being able to go through and work on absolutely massive data sets.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. Now that seems super overwhelming to to in traditional computer science land, you think about searching a giant space like satellite images, and you think that you couldn't possibly make a product because it would just be way too much data. How has using these sort of Copilot tools in these multidimensional spaces changed how you think about working on hard problems like this one?
It's a good question. So we built the whole back end of the tool ourselves. So the mapping space we are doing is completely custom. But what it's really changed, the ability to use a Copilot like mentality and be able to search from any text prompt or any hand drawing or anything like that, really makes it a lot more accessible. So first off, being able to search something like 18 trillion pixels of satellite data, that alone is sort of overwhelming and hard to get your head around. But how do you really guide the AI to find the things you're looking for? It's very rare that you're going to have an exact picture of the exact thing you're looking for, and it's only going to look like that. And a nice frozen AI model is going to continue to perform for you. It's more often that you really want that human nudge. We've got so much pattern matching capability between our ears that adding that bit in there is what this sort of tool allows you to do. It allows you to imagine something, type it in, have a tool generate that, and then guide the AI to the sorts of things you're looking for. And I think the key for us is it just makes it tremendously accessible. With even people without AI and machine learning backgrounds can literally search the entire Earth for something they're looking for.
Yeah, incredible. Are there any sort of downsides to, with DALL-E, you could come up with all sorts of really interesting images. Do you ever get to the any user friction where you say, hey, I want an image like this, and then you kind of know exactly what you want, and there's kind of like that uncanny valley of actually getting to the right thing? Or does the working in such a number of different multidimensional spaces actually kind of smooth out that problem?
Yeah, I think it smooths it out a lot. I mean, some of the challenges we have is with lower resolution satellite data. We do need to blur the images a little bit because the DALL-E generated images look so crisp and good. They're, I think, 1024 by 1024 resolution. So we do need to blur it a bit to make it look like lower resolution satellite data. The other challenge we have, which I think all AI imagery applications have, is that a lot of folks still want to sort of look for things that you can't even see with the human eye. And it's just a hard application for any AI, rake included. You sort of, our mechanism is you basically have to be able to see what you're looking for and say, yep, that's probably a bush, in order to actually search for it. But otherwise, I think it relieves a lot of the friction because of the size of the space we're searching.
Yeah, this hasn't quite fixed the Star Trek enhanced problem.
Sadly, no, we're waiting for that one.
Well, I don't know. I think with generative AI, it might not be too far off in the future. So I'll look forward to that. It's one of the next features. Now, in terms of what it was actually like building these tools, and your first time working through it for other founders who are looking at this and maybe a little overwhelmed at trying to understand everything, what were some of the lessons that you learned in applying this technology?
I would say the biggest lesson learned is make sure that your core underlying technology is pretty tight before you start integrating things like large language models and generative AI. It's once you have a tool that allows you to do this, it's awesome, and it can really change the course of what people can do with your tool. But all that underlying stuff needs to be pretty much perfect at that point, is what we found, because the ability for anyone to use the tool is awesome, but the challenge with that is then anyone will use the tool, and you need to have that underlying stuff really work well. Otherwise, I think you can find yourself in a pretty big, customer support challenges, as a whole different persona is going to use the tool and maybe not as technically oriented as in the past. So yeah, we get everything else working first, I would say, before you add that layer on top that really allows that searchability and ability to interact with it for anyone.
Well, and because it's opened up to new customers, do you think that this has fundamentally changed your business?
I do, yeah. I think when we started the company, we were mostly focusing on selling to other AI companies, like companies with 600 or 700 people in it that were AI practitioners. But part of it was because you still needed to interact with the tool. You still needed to think like an AI and data scientist. With the advent of large language models and generative AI and tools like DALL-E, and being able to then map that into rake space, we've kind of broken that restriction, and we have folks using it that have no AI or data science teams at all and are still able to affect those insights that they're looking for large scale data, be it satellite or video or still imagery.
Well, That's absolutely incredible. I never would have thought on such a massive data set that we'd be able to go through and use an arbitrary prompt to be able to search for just about anything. Has people search for things that you couldn't have come up with on your own?
Yeah, all the time. And part of it is because normally when you're looking for things, you might think you know what they're going to look like, but an expert or a single subject matter expert in the area is going to search for things that you wouldn't imagine. I'll give you an example on the Chinese balloon that we found. The way the sensor worked, the satellite sensor, is that the balloon, because it was at high altitude, it parallaxed and created a red, blue and green copy of the balloon. So it actually wasn't a nice white balloon we were looking for, but rather this crazy red, green, blue copy of a balloon. And that was basically something we wouldn't have thought of without knowledge, subject matter expertise of that balloon. So what you see in the video looks like a white balloon, but it's really a red, green, and blue copy. And we're just showing the different frames as a black and white frames. But that was one where wouldn't have thought about that in the beginning, I think, without thinking about the sensors and allowing subject matter experts to really be the ones that drive the tool as opposed to AI and data scientists.
I mean, incredible. I absolutely remember that news story, and just being able to immediately after the advent of a new national event, be able to go through and understand it. I heard of another startup doing something similar where they were able to understand that there was potentially a pandemic right at the beginning of COVID from a similar technology. I think it absolutely changes the way that we think about how we interact with data in this world, and that was an incredible example.
Thank you.
So in order to keep us moving along, and I'll try to give a little pause so that the editor can find the spot, I'll introduce Arnon in 10 seconds. So Arnon, I would love for you to be able to tell us a little bit about your own company and everything around being able to go through and understand videos with LLMs and Hour One AI. So could you tell us about Hour One AI?
Sure, I can tell you a bit about Hour One. So we started about 4 years ago to build our foundational model that can actually turn any person into an avatar and make it speak photorealistic. You will not know if it's synthetic or real. And after we managed to build our own model and train it on hours of video, we created a product that uses this foundational model called Reels. This product actually was text to video. So what we did, we enabled anyone, even people without skills of video editing, to create their videos. They had to just input text, and then we combined text to speech with our avatars and cloud rendering capabilities to create videos. And one of the challenges that we saw people face is the blank page. So they started with some blank page. They didn't know how to write, what to write. Either they came with something prepared that wasn't oriented towards a narration or people talking, and they were stuck. And then LLM came along, and we introduced it within the product, and we immediately saw a change there. You can start from just a prompt here and get the entire video ready for you. And what we did is we combined our knowledge of creating videos about the cuts and the cadence and the voices and the images and the colors. And we input it into the LLM and actually created a video just from a prompt. For example, this is introducing a new feature of a product. And what we get is actually a full storyboard, complete with the text, images, colors, and everything. And then we could just render it in the cloud. And if you like to change one scene, you can always do that, or use, again, the GPT and Copilot to make it shorter, longer, or make it in a different tone. And the stuff that we put into that model is our knowledge about how do transcripts translate well to videos and not just text that you write or send in an email. And we also introduced this within our every element. So for example, here you can see an image. I can press on this little magic wand, and what it will do, it will take the scene and the entire context of this video and pick the right image scene. For example, we do this with titles. And what we found is that the velocity of video creation just went through the roof. People just find it very easy now to create videos, and they do it more oftenly and change it a lot. And we just see people use it every day and just keep creating videos. And what we're doing is learning how people change it after they create the videos. What do they change and how do they interact with the system to better train the language model and make it more grounded to what they need. And this is, again, this is the thing that enables our product to actually accelerate and make it more interesting and exciting and just available to anyone from any part of the company, from customer success to sales, to even engineers that want to update what they did this week, and of course marketing and so on. And yeah, that's the product and what we do.
Awesome. My own team, we record video updates once a week. Hey, here's what's top of mind. Here's what we're thinking about. And there's a few times after CTO Whiskey Club that I really don't want to be on camera. And so that seems like an amazing tool to be able to get people to be a little bit more interactive. How are some of the ways that people are actually using the product?
So people are coming in with either showcasing their feature updates or their knowledge base or their marketing, and just going in, pasting some of their text, and then changing it using the GPT or a Copilot. But others just come in, write some text in the prompt there saying, welcoming a new employee, name Arnon, and then just from there start to change it and play around with it and just generate videos. And what we saw is once we introduced this feature, and the adoption was amazing, and it was thanks to, of course, OpenAI education of the market, but people just couldn't stop using it. And before that, we had as I said before, the blank canvas problem, that people just saw just a white space of text and they didn't know what to write. Now it's just very easy for them. And for us, it was interesting to integrate because we began from text. That was our base. So text to avatar and text to video was where we started from. And then integrating this very native integration of a tool was amazing for us to do.
Yeah, it seems like you were just ahead of times with the avatars that you were created, and it was in the perfect space. How did it transform your business from just before you had the Copilot to just after?
So I think what we saw is the amount of videos that people want to create went, I think, doubled or 4 times as much, because it was easy to do. And it was a challenge for us in the beginning to think how we can make people create better videos. We wrote the recipes or the text ourselves and thought about building templates. And once this went in, it just changed everything. So this was a major change. And the challenge that we see right now is the grounding to the context of the company. For example, you don't want to always insert what type of company that you do, what type of business that you want to do, what type of video. You want this saved in our databases or in our data, so you can reuse the already context within our systems, just generate more videos. So that's the challenges we face today. But the change was amazing. And for us, I think the thing that we learned is how to combine the knowledge of video creation and what we already done with the power of the GPT tool. So if you just create a movie script for this and that, you will get something, but it will not be that engaging. It will not fit to our system, and we learned how to do that together.
Amazing. And so really tools for creators and creativity, be able to kind of go through and get people to create things that they might not otherwise build a lot easier.
So I think it's not just creators. Actually, what we thought is what we learned, that everybody becomes a creator now. So as I said, even my engineers, they become creators. They want to say something. They want to have their character speak at the end of the week, and everybody becomes some kind of a creator because they create in their job and they want to explain or even use it in their LinkedIn to share something that they did, and they're afraid of standing in front of the camera and speaking. And now they have a tool to do that. and it just makes it easier for them. And that's what we just saw, the democratization of video creation within the companies. It's just amazing to see the change now.
You know, one of the first things that I asked ChatGPT when I was working with it was, hey, I'm terrible at writing thank you notes, and I always feel like I'm embarrassed writing thank you notes. I don't know what to say. And I said, hey, is there like a book that I can read? And ChatGPT responded, it's called Social Skills. And then I changed my mind and I said, okay, how about you give me some prompts? And then I'd say, okay, make it a little bit more casual, make it, I'd tell you a little bit about my relationship with one of the people who are there. And I went from being a person who hated writing thank you notes to a person who writes thank you notes all the time. And so I can't wait to try to use your tool to actually go through, and as a person who doesn't really like being on camera, actually go through and build some more videos. I think that's incredible.
Yeah, that's the reaction that we usually get, and it's really fun to actually integrate the Copilot with the entire Gen AI stack. So text to avatars, text to audio, text to music, actually text to images, everything together combines, and we have one composition of generated media, which is just amazing to see what it enables people to do. So, yeah.
Now, are there any lessons learned with adopting this technology that you would tell other people who are trying it for the first time?
Yeah, so I think we learned how to integrate it within our UX and find out how do we integrate it with the knowledge of what we do already. So if you know how to make videos or you know how to do something, how do you integrate that knowledge within this tool? And I think what is the most interesting thing for us right now is actually understanding how we input context and knowledge of the customers and what they need, and not have them repeat this information inputting. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons that we learned, how that actually lowers the barrier of creation and just makes everything easier. So if you input some context, then over time it just becomes easier and easier to create more and more videos and content. And I think as this industry grows, the grounding, the hallucinations or grounding of facts and those become more and more important to people, because it was very nice, as you said, that OpenAI was funny with you, but maybe it's not in the company context or B2B context. It's a bit more problematic. You need to find methods to overcome this and actually supply those companies with solutions for their problems.
Yeah, I would love prompts to help my team be excited to put up their own status updates and share kind of what they're thinking about.
So we have an internal channel of updates every week. So it's amazing to see for us. It's like TikTok for the office. Like people just everyday updates and they do everything.
So incredible for all three of the founders here. We had basically community was one of the first things that came out of using generative AI. People were all excited to be able to share this and be able to interact with each other, which is honestly not the theme that I think that we were going to come away with today. But transform your business, engage with community, get people trying and iterating a lot quicker, and being able to be their own sort of expand your tool set much greater than it would have been without this technology. Well, I feel like we're probably at the end of our time. Is there anything that you guys wanted to ask each other before we wrapped up?
More of a comment than an ask, but I started mentioning how I was frustrated with AI because it wasn't doing that ability to automate the tasks and make us better at what we're doing as humans. But pretty cool that all three of the companies here are doing exactly that, right? I mean, it seems like that thing that I was frustrated about in grad school is actually starting to get resolved through the work of companies like this. It's awesome.
And Corey, in graduate school, I made a image data labeler that is still used in universities today. And the one thing that I learned is the last thing you want is your machine learning engineers to be the ones labeling images. And that's exactly what you learned with the Chinese balloon. So I feel like we had a similar tool.
That's awesome. Yep.
Well, thanks so much, guys.
Great discussion, and it feels that it was very useful based on the chat and comments. And now I'm delighted to have Rachel Shepherd, as she will be presenting the new frontier of LLM-based UX, designing for Copilot.
And I'm the director of design for Azure AI's platform. So I lead a team of designers and researchers. And I'm going to be walking through some of the design principles that we're using at Microsoft internally when we are thinking about creating experiences with copilots. And I'm going to cover kind of broadly two areas. The first part is sort of the design systems that we're using internally to help coordinate, organize, kind of get everyone going in the same direction, how we think about experiences for copilots and building on top of large language models. And then the second part is about some considerations that you might think about architecturally, like when you're piecing together sort of your back end, basically, to make sure that it's going to have a cohesive experience built on top of it, things that you want to think about up front. So I'm going to jump right in. The chapters here roughly are sort of the design systems we're using, the principles we're thinking about, parts of that design system, and then, how to bring it to fruition in practice. So let's rally first around this idea of like, what is a copilot? It can be big, small, where does it live? This is actually, we're thinking of it pretty broadly. It's not one exact thing. It's more of a category of experiences. It's like an app or a component that we know uses natural language processing or a large language model underneath it. So like GPT-4, and it really is a ride along. It assists people in whatever task they're doing. So it could be small, like a little sidecar. It could be some toast or notifications, or it could be a full-blown app. So there's some range there. But just think of it as any sort of assistive experience built on a large language model. So the reason that this shift, the designing for these types of experiences are really different, has to do with the way that we use input. So natural language changes a lot of the experience tenets and principles and pillars that we've used in the past. So because natural language becomes the new interface, it shifts the workload, it shifts the customer journey, and it really just sort of fundamentally from the ground up changes how we think about the experience. So that's the big difference. The thing that it impacts is that what we're finding is that as a user interacts with a copilot, there's a ongoing continuous loop where they put something in, an input, and they get something out. And based on that, they make a new input, and then there's a new output. And so there's this ongoing interaction that kind of keeps going and going. It's no longer linear. So the new experience, we think of this as probabilistic, meaning before we were building UX with like a regular website or an application, we mapped out our user journeys very linearly, right? We knew it was sort of deterministic. We go like, oh, user does this, then this happens. User does this, then that happens. And it's not like that anymore. It's what we're thinking of it as probabilistic. And that means we can kind of guesstimate where people are going to go, but we're not totally sure. There's a lot of variation in their experiences. And each customer journey is unique. There's not like one path through the experience. So one way we're talking about this is defining this as a collaborative UX. So basically, as designers and engineers, we think of it as like we're creating a party. We're hosts for the party, and we're kind of like dressing up the room. People come in. After that, you don't know what's going to happen, but it's a collaboration. It's a conversation that you're having with somebody, and that loop of inputs and outputs is more what you're trying to design for. So some of the design principles we're using. The first one is around establishing trust with the system. A lot of people are new to working or talking with large language models. They may not even know that's what's happening. And so we need to think about structuring that experience in a few ways. So it's really rooted in trust, that people can trust the system they're working in. How do we get there? One of the things is that we try to be very active in helping people spot inaccurate or harmful content and finding ways to flag that. We help and coach people into writing better inputs into the system. And then we also help them understand, parse, and use the output that they get out of the system. So these sort of 4 responsible AI principles are something we're using across Microsoft to make sure that we're really sort of level setting with the user how this experience is going to go. Some of the ways that we're using copilots, or at least large language models and copilots we're building on top of them, it's really good for a few things and a few scenarios, and it's not good at other ones. So one of the things that we know these copilots excel at for experiences is in content generation, auto completion, taking one thing and transforming it into another. Like, let's say you start with a list of bullets and you would like a full paragraph, that kind of thing. Summarization is amazing, Q&A, conversation, and then also just like labeling and classification. So creating copilots around these buckets of scenarios is working well for us. And some, I'm sure as we keep growing and building these, we'll find more. But in general, as you're tackling scenarios and use cases, think of these areas as opportunities where a copilot could help. The first principle that we're talking about, so building appropriate trust, is really in helping users understand and create a new mental model around how these language models work. So for a really simple example is, this is not a search, right? It's GPT-4 and copilots built on top of them are great aggregators, summarizers, but it's not a search. So how do you explain to a user that, that's not the way that they type into being is not the same way that you would use this? And I'll show you some of the design patterns that we're looking at. Another principle that we're looking at is putting people first, which means that, people may not have enough information or experience using this. And so you really have to help give them like incremental information as they go. And actually we're adding in a little bit more friction into the system. And I'll show you what that means. The next part is accessible. So one of the amazing things about using like all the cognitive services is that they are extensions of human capabilities and creates a lot of opportunity for us to create more inclusive experiences. But one of the things that we have to think about is, how do we make sure that we're not building a new technology that's not available to everyone who wants to use it? So we're working really hard to create durable patterns and interaction patterns that are accessible by everybody. And then part of that is reducing the number of patterns that we have. So right here on the right is an example of an Office Copilot, and are called out in 1 through 8 here, some of the patterns that we're using repeatedly in the experience. So like we always are using a header. We always have a way to dismiss it. Obviously you need somewhere to type in. So you have a text area. You have a explicit generate button. That's part of that keep a user in control. And then this little sparkle here is to indicate, hey, AI is being used. There's a place for settings. You can attach or reference a file that you want to start with, etc. So these are some of the patterns that we're coming up with. Feel free to borrow from these as you're building out your own. Let's talk a little bit about what a design system is and how we use this. So if you're not in the design world, a design system is really, it's a set of best practices. It's a way to codify the patterns that designers are using so that we're not like redesigning everything all the time. We can share these common components. It's like a playbook of those principles we talked about. Interaction patterns, I just started to show you, the visual design specifications, maybe even the actual code itself, like front-end code that you can reuse. But the focus here on using a design system is to have consistent experiences that scale. We are publishing our Fluent internal Microsoft design system externally. I really invite you to go check that out and use some of those as you get started. Or think about if you're working with a large enough team, anything, maybe a team of more than 2, you'll want to start looking at a design system that you can leverage to, reduce how long things take and then, build in some consistency. This is a quick video of some of the components that we're using in our design system, just so you can get an idea of how the designers are thinking about this. So there's some motion guidance here. You can see some of the buttons and the sizes are all spelled out, and some of these are pieced together into larger components. That motion angle is really important for us to solidify so that we're not redoing that each time. So quick sizzle reel on what that looks like for us. And the next is there are a lot of new types of interaction patterns outside of just that visual design or that motion or the components that we are thinking about. The Copilot system specifically has 6 components, ranging from that UX framework through the design language and patterns, all the way into the ops and how different disciplines organize themselves to integrate some of these. Another quick video here showing you some of the components and pieces of our design system. And then that actually is giving you an overview of some of the different sizes here. So each of those are copilots. I'm going to play it again. The one on the right is a sidecar experience. This one's a standalone. And this is a full screen experience, more like a full chat experience. So in terms of picking those sizes and when you're working through your design language and design system, these are some of the patterns that we're seeing. So first is that when you're above, so that's a copilot or some sort of ride-along experience that stays with the user, but the content changes out, but it stays steady. And the middle one beside, these are more like panels that you open and close as needed. And then inside is more of like in the middle of a workflow, you might invoke something. So those are one way that you can think about your copilot. It's not all the same. And another quick video showing you how some of that might work. So here's that panel experience. And some of the patterns that we have here that I can call out for you is that whole user and control thing. So obviously some of the same interactions that you would see, but like this thumbs up, thumbs down is super important. That's that feedback mechanism for people to tell us if content is harmful or accurate. You know, how was that answer for you? Some more controls to help them understand some of the capabilities. Like people may not know that they could summarize something, or they might need hints around what to do next. And here's like the little AI indicator again that tells them that, hey, this is generated or powered by AI. Really important disclosure. And another quick video showing you some of these examples. Here in this Copilot, they are using some of the controls to manage the output and to control the way that the data is showed to them. So they might, want to keep refining it. People don't know that they're writing prompts or doing prompt engineering every time they do an input. So we have to give them other ways to do that. So this try again button makes sense, or they might want to change the output by changing the text length. And this is just a close-up, so I can call out some of the features and some of the patterns here. So this is a mock-up for like in Word. This would be an invoked experience. It's a small bubble, and you can see there's a lot of hints here. So first we're telling them, what exactly they can do. We're giving them indicators like suggestions, auto suggestions, and then also the dismiss, so they can keep working in the way that they want to work. All right, so some of the interaction patterns that are unique to this space. So one would be around just user education, showing, why someone would be using this, or, what the limitations too are of working in a large language model. So we don't want to like overclaim or over promote all the things that this thing could do. We sort of want people to discover that on their own. And a really important part, and I can't emphasize this one enough, is that it's important to always indicate to the user when we're using AI. And we're looking at these patterns. So right here, we've got this, we're calling it an AI notice. It's a small piece of code, like a small piece of text that will sort of, the users can start to recognize as a pattern of like, oh, this is generated by AI, this is generated by AI. We've got that, sort of the industry's rallied around the sparkle. I'm sure that'll continue to normalize, but they'll need some sort of text or iconography-based way to tell people that it's powered by a large language model. The auto-completion or suggested prompts, like I said, people may not know they're using prompts, but giving them shortcuts or suggestions as they're working is a really great way to sort of, you're training the trainer on how to use this system. So finding ways to weave that in, highly recommend. And then in terms of encouraging the detail. So this is like, I think anyone who's played with GPT and any of the forums knows that like the refining as you go and the kind of prompt crafting is really important. So figuring out how to like sort of nudge people in that direction. Like I said before, we're using, I'll skip on the slide. we're using these nudges to get people to keep adding more detail and color as they work. Okay, so latency is really interesting because the latency experience of a language model is very different than the web. We're going to continue to see changes in performance, but managing users' expectations for how the system should or shouldn't respond is really interesting for having a good experience or not. So obviously, like if you're putting in a prompt and there's some delay or the system is digesting that, having like a blank experience wouldn't be great. People might think the system is broken. So we do need to provide some transparency into what's happening. But also we can handle this in a couple clever ways where we can explain what the system is doing. We could use animation. In this mock-up, what you're seeing is there's like a stop generating button. It keeps the user in control so that like if it's taking too long or they're not comfortable with that, they can stop the whole process. But do think about those like interstitial experiences that come on with this new technology that you may not have to accommodate today. And a really interesting principle and pattern that we're working through is around this idea of adding friction. So these systems are so powerful and can do so much on their own. We actually are finding it necessary to add stops, or you could think of them as like consent breathers or breaks in the experience, so that things don't happen too quickly or that people are aware of what they're doing. You can think of like anytime they're making a decision or adjusting the system and the output could be dramatically different, we add a little pause. So in this example, the modal, reminds them that before adding content, that it may not be totally accurate. I mean, partly we're sort of doing expectation management here, but you could, of course, do the experience without this, but the outcome may be negative for the user in the sense that they are then surprised by inaccuracies instead of understanding the way that the system works. So think a little bit about, sprinkling in some friction in the system as needed. Definitely look at how you're going to add citations. This is about building trust in the system. So when people don't understand where an answer is generated from, or they don't have the ability to kind of like jump off the Copilot and go do their own research, that can feel really uncertain. So we're finding it necessary to add in as many references and citations as possible so that people can use those. And then lastly is that feedback loop. And this is a really interesting one because this is layers of like, where's the feedback going? Are they people sending feedback on the model itself? Are they sending feedback on your app? Are they sending feedback on the reference material or the content that was used? It's kind of hard to sort through that. So think a little bit about how you're soliciting feedback and how you talk about it. This one's like, they're sending feedback specifically to Microsoft, not to OpenAI or GPT or whatever language models underneath. And, of course, there's consent here about contacting for feedback and things like that. And then we have this extra thing about, inappropriate content. That's more about the model itself. So when you're, it's really easy to overwhelm users with feedback mechanisms. But in this case, it just becomes a little bit more complicated. And so take some time to think about how you want to ask users for feedback and how to differentiate between what kind of feedback they're giving you. All right. So content is really incredibly important. We already know that for an experience, words matter. But in this case, words start to really matter and are sort of make or break in terms of how users trust your system. One of the rules that we're thinking about is avoiding humanizing AI. So it's really easy to, start calling AI a name or giving them a personality. Based on our research that we're finding, it's better to not humanize the AI and to talk about it more as technology, because that's what it is. And, that's the reason you're not seeing, Clippy or some name that ends in A show up again. So we want people to understand that this is a system and that it doesn't think for itself or reason for itself. And it can avoid some sort of uncomfortable situations where users start to assume or build a narrative around what the system does and doesn't do. So something to think about. So in the spirit of that, is it okay to use the word I? And we're seeing yes, Like the system can say the word I, can say I am this, I am that, but we're being very careful not to have a personality. Like in this example, you know, it's fine for it to say, sorry, I can't help with that, but it's not saying, I this person, with this personality and doing all these things for you. So it's a careful line, but do think about how you position and how you write that kind of system prompt for your Copilot. I'm going to shift gears a little bit away from design principles and how you're making the experience itself. And I'm going to talk about, some of the patterns and trends and themes I'm seeing from customers as they build these out, and just give you a little heads up, sort of like, here's some things that we're noticing out in the field and some, maybe help you get ahead a little bit. So one of the things, at least in Azure, both internally and externally, is that building that architecture in the back end in a way that will be conducive to a great experience is super important. I've seen, at least for us when we were first starting, we're kind of like racing through the technology, building an experience. And what we noticed is that if we hadn't set up the architecture in certain ways, like we would hit a wall, like the experience would be limited. Let me give you some specific examples of what I mean. So in a regular like web environment or application, one of the things that we always think about is, trust. Is the system trustworthy? Is it accurate? Is it performant? Is it usable? And in this world, for a large language model, and when you're building that out, the components underneath the hood that translate to that are like the data pipelines, which model you pick, what kind of compute you've selected, how you do your prompt design. All of those translate over to those tenets of good design. So you can think a little bit like if you're building on top of the Microsoft cloud, which data pipeline and data sources you're using could really influence the trust that this user has in the system. Which model you select might change how accurate it is, how much compute you apply to your project. If you're doing that, some folks are, taking stuff out of the box, which is great. But if you are configuring some of these more advanced layers, then these are things you want to think about. You'll definitely be working on your own system prompt. So consider and think about how your system prompt may affect usability. The way that you build out these applications is also really different. So one of the things that we're seeing just sort of universally from teams is that there's a new type of collaboration between full stack or think of them as full stack engineering teams now. So we really have noticed that bringing in design, user research from the beginning, and working on crafting your experience and the architecture in parallel and having those teammates work together as the solutions piece together is the best. Rather than more of like a waterfall approach where maybe the architecture team sort of puts together a proposal and then a spec is written and then design gets that, we are shifting more to having everyone work together, both for speed, but also to, as we work through this new paradigm of interaction and experience, we're just finding that communication is super helpful. And then the next part is actually, this is my last part, is figuring out how to, we're shipping this new thing, and we don't know everything about it, right? Like we're still sort of figuring out our design principles. We're figuring out what's working best. And because this environment is changing so quickly, because we're learning more every day, this emphasis on building in a continuous feedback loop is so important. It basically means you need to find ways, not just in the app, but through telemetry, instrumentation, user interviews, surveys. You need a variety of qualitative and quantitative feedback mechanisms so that you can iterate as you go, because guaranteed you're going to ship, this new collaborative UX, this new experience, and you're going to put it out there in the wild, and your users are going to start using it, and they're going to do something you weren't planning for or you weren't expecting. They may use this in a way that you had never thought of, and there's like a way better idea than you had to begin with. But you have to figure out how to learn about that, right? You can't just ship it and kind of forget it. So think thoroughly through how you're going to get feedback on an ongoing basis and how you're going to iterate and make changes and updates as you go. And so, when you're first starting your project and planning this all out, sort of think to the end, which is, how am I going to be continuously improving this and making it better? I think that'll set you up for success. All right, so that's my quick I'm going to run through of copilots at Microsoft and the design systems and experiences that we are thinking about. I hope it's helpful.
Amazing. So thank you for all of the questions. Now, last but not least, we are going to have our last session of this event with Jeremy Chapman with Microsoft Mechanics and how Microsoft 365 Copilot works.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining me on this last session for Microsoft 365 Copilot. You know, there are lots of opportunities. Today is probably the best time to get started in terms of building your own Copilots. So what I wanted to do right now is actually show you some of the things that we've done from the Microsoft 365 Copilot perspective, and really have you think about how you can transition and translate some of those things into building your own Copilots, and just kind of walk through this kind of like a case study in terms of getting you prepared for building your first Copilot. So when you think about Microsoft 365 Copilot, and just if you can actually even replace the Microsoft 365 with your app in the future, but really it's leveraging a couple of different things. Of course, the large language model as a foundational model that you can use in order to do generative AI and really take advantage of those types of things. Your data, in this case, we're using the Microsoft Graph as a means for encapsulating your data, which means as an API with the Microsoft Graph, not only can you do things like search to find data, to find files, to find even activities through the Microsoft Graph, but because it's an API, it also supports various put commands, so you can actually use it to place text and place other elements inside of a file, as you'll see with things like Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. And that really is kind of the third pillar when you think about the Microsoft 365 app. So again, in our case, we're looking at Microsoft 365 apps like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, Teams, and even Loop. But in this case, in case you're building a Copilot for yourself, obviously you're going to be using some of these concepts to import those into your specific apps and your IP. All right, so what does this all mean? So first, from a Microsoft 365 Copilot perspective, all of this is really about saving you a ton of time in terms of getting you started with your documents, your spreadsheets, your PowerPoint presentations, your Outlook files, getting caught up quickly inside of Teams, or summarizing a meeting that's maybe going on in Teams that you were late to, those types of things. And even in Loop, one of the new exciting things that's not on this particular visual allows you to even work with others in terms of building out your own prompts with the large language model. So these experiences, and you'll see this kind of, I think, throughout the company, we're trying to basically add these amazing generative AI experiences right in the context of any of the work experiences, the apps, the familiar user interfaces that you use every day, to really save you a lot of time to get started, to really get past that kind of blank page syndrome when you think about getting started on any of these types of files that you're creating. That's also another mantra that translates, I think, pretty well into most other applications. So when we think about what we can do, for example, as I mentioned, using things like Microsoft Graph, that means that we can, in the context of these different applications, actually not just generate text and generate the content itself, but also, because we're using Word, Excel, PowerPoint, that's got a bit of formatting involved with it, we can even format the content into the right look and feel so that people can get a ton of value from it right off the bat really quickly. And the main thing here is that we're accessing business content and context and really saving, again, a lot of time and hopefully exceeding expectations in terms of what a user can do very quickly to generate amazing content and amazing outputs in a lot less time than they would have needed before. So when we think about Microsoft 365 Copilot, let me just show you one example, because you've probably seen all the other examples and you've heard throughout the day, what you can do with Azure OpenAI service and quite a few other foundational parts of the platform. But just from a cross-app experience, here's what you can do with Microsoft 365 Copilot. And this is what's currently running today. So here we're in Microsoft Teams. And in this case, it gives you some ideas in terms of how you can get started with prompts inside of the experience. So in our case, we actually want to look for, to prepare for a customer sales pitch using our Relic Cloud Thunderbolt e-bike. And we can also call on different people and files and meetings as context for that. So in our case, we actually want to call into this specification doc here. And when we do that and we start to generate content with that in the context of Teams, it actually gives us this nice pitch for our bike. And now we can also do things like create a SWOT analysis. So it knows what a SWOT analysis is with strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats. It knows how to format that into the right kind of format so you can easily get value, and also pulls out the right type of information there too. And one of the important things with Microsoft 365 Copilot is that it's always citing references where it's pulling that information from. So we have here our e-bike market share size, which is web-based analytics, and also our Thunderbolt presentation that you see here. So now let's say we want to actually create a premium version of the bike, and we're looking for ideas for that. So the great thing is here, we can take the context of the previous question and the previous prompt in turn, and then based on that, it actually will be able to find the information to give us some recommendations in terms of the market, what user expectations might be, and give us some good data in terms of what we might want to plan for our next version of this e-bike. So that's just one example, and we've shown other examples in the past. Let's say you've been on vacation for some period of time and you want to get caught up quickly inside of Microsoft Teams. You can say, what did I miss in terms of customer interactions with this company, or what meetings happened while I was gone? Those types of things are also very easily generated through Teams in this cross-app experience. So what all of this really boils down to, and you'll hear a few different terms for this, and I think probably the term of the day has been retrieval augmented generation. And I want to explain how that works, even though you probably have some understanding in terms of how that works, having seen all the different presentations today. Where it starts is with the large language model. Now, the large language model works with Microsoft 365 Copilot really as an orchestration layer. Now, the orchestration layer interacts with the different apps so that you can input your prompts directly in the context of those apps. It can then search different locations, present that information to the orchestration layer in terms of a prompt with that additional retrieved information, and produce an informed response. Now, key to all this is the Microsoft Graph, because not only does the graph include the mechanism to search the different files that you have access to, and that's an important point here. It's all based on the permissions and access that you have as a user working with Copilot. It can also pull up things like your affinity with, say, individuals in an organization in the directory service, your manager, coworkers, those types of things, different activities that you may have done on Microsoft Teams or in Outlook. And it can bring all of that different context together to really inform a response above and beyond what it would just be able to do, say, if you pasted in text from a document or something. It gives you that additional signal that you can use to really make the responses that much better. And we're also doing something I'll talk about in a minute called semantic index, where we're even kind of preempting some of those different calls and some of the relationships there to where the performance can be even faster. Think about things right now in the graph, like when you look at files that are trending around you or your most recently used list. Those are using indexes that we'll talk about in a second in terms of speeding up some of the processes, so that every time you open up your Microsoft.com, Microsoft365.com page, you'll see those files trending around to your most recently used list, etc., versus calculating that with the API call directly and trying to figure those things out exactly during that call. So we're indexing things in advance to really speed stuff up. That's part of what we're doing with the semantic index. When we think about the large language model itself, it's learning from public sources of information. So it has access to knowledge that is public. So you can ask it things like, tell me about Microsoft 365, because that's public information. It can learn and be trained from different sources that are public to it. It can describe what you want to know. In our case, when we do something called few shot prompting here, we say we want it in a short sentence. It can then tailor the output of that prompt and that response back to what we want. In this case, a single sentence about Microsoft 365. So let's say though we want to expand this, because it has the additional context from the previous. It knows what context you're talking about as you ask it additional questions, because what it's doing is it's adding every turn to the prompt history. That's part of the session for that specific conversation that you're having, or that specific session that you're having with Microsoft 365 Copilot. And that is session based. None of this goes into or gets trained into the large language model. These are all things that are basically temporary history. If you've used things like Bing Chat with the sweep function, once you close that conversation and end the conversation, you have the ability to basically wipe that memory clean in terms of the session itself. Again, in either construct, the large language model isn't learning or getting trained from any of the information that you're inputting there. And so, for example, if you sweep away a conversation in Bing Chat and ask it the exact same thing tomorrow or 1 minute later, it doesn't know what you just asked it because you've swept away that temporary history. So really what it boils down to then, in terms of as a startup, what you think about, you have really 3 different pillars about the experience, what the user sees, the platform that you're building on, and then also establishing trust. So making sure that you've got the right mechanisms in place from a security, compliance, governance, responsible AI perspective. So let me boil this down to you and get more real in terms of what it means from a startup's perspective. I actually started my career as a startup and startup incubator, believe it or not. So I know kind of in terms of the mindset and kind of what you're thinking about as you're building out these different products and solutions. So from the Copilot stack perspective, so you've got everything from the Microsoft cloud layer kind of at the foundation, and we've got unparalleled, unmatched AI infrastructure that you can use from the Azure cloud, incorporating your data, kind of like we're doing with the Microsoft Graph here in our case for Microsoft 365 Copilot, leveraging those foundation models. And we don't say specifically that it's just one flavor of GPT, because there are other models that you can use. And then you have that orchestration layer, and that's really where a lot of the value can be added, because that's doing all of these different calls to the graph, finding data, doing pre-processing, post-processing against the prompts that are sent to and received from the large language model. Those types of things are where you can really, as a developer and as a startup, kind of influence all of that response and how those prompts are configured, using things like system prompts, prompt augmentation as part of the way that you build your apps. That means that you can not only leverage Microsoft Copilots, but also build your own Copilots. And then another great opportunity, I think, here is that you can also, if you've got an app ecosystem already, or want to use an existing app ecosystem, you can build plugins that will allow the retrieval of information to go beyond things just like the Microsoft Graph and go into third-party services, maybe your services or other leading services, to really augment the sources where retrieval augmented generation can retrieve its information. So that means that you can use extensibility that's built in either through ChatGPT plugins, you can use Teams message extensions, and also Power Platform connectors. And there are lots of great ways to connect to other kind of data that's outside of the Microsoft 365 or kind of native Power Platform remit in order to connect those data sources in. All right, so let's talk about the user experience, and let's kind of break this down in terms of some of the technology areas. So I like to show this visual because, it's got a lot going on. I'm going to just kind of boil it down in terms of what the different steps are. So it really starts out in the upper left corner, with your apps. So the app is going to expose the interface in order to build out the different prompt experiences that you will present to the user. Now you can, like we saw with the cross app model there, suggest prompts, and you can also leave it as open text. So when the prompt is then sent to the orchestration layer, what that's going to do is do the first stage of pre-processing. Sometimes you'll refer to this as grounding or retrieval augmented generation, part of the steps, but it's going to go and then leverage additional information, things that the user doesn't see. If you recall the visual before, there are things that the user types and what the user sees, and then there's kind of the magic of the things that the user doesn't see that we'll go into a bit more detail here. So that's going to be things like your default or system or meta prompt that you have for every prompt that's inside of that system. So with something like that, you can say, always be helpful, always be polite with responses, how you refer to your Copilot if it's referring to itself in the third person. Those types of things can be done, as well as, for example, mandating that there are actual citations and that the prompt responses are factual. Then we're actually going and grabbing the additional content, retrieving that information, in our case from the Microsoft Graph, and using things like semantic index for speed ups and getting more information quickly to that prompt. And then with that, we can send the prompt, and that's kind of what step 3 looks like, over to the large language model. So if you think about the prompt, now it's got a system prompt element to it, the user's question, information that's retrieved. Even though the user sees like one sentence, it might have sent 1,000 characters over to the large language model to be able to respond to that prompt. Now there's another opportunity once the LLM responds back to actually do some additional post-processing. So in a lot of cases, this is one of the things where you might not be able to catch everything up front, and the LLM might respond with something that isn't necessarily most fitting or desirable in terms of its response back. So even through the grounding process and post-processing, you can do some things to massage the response back to the user to make sure it's kind of meeting or exceeding that user's expectations. So all of these things kind of happen in a split second as the user just types their prompt and sends it. Then you see all of these different processing steps that happen. The main thing is that all of this stays in the Microsoft 365 Copilot perspective within the Microsoft 365 trust boundary. The Azure OpenAI service is running the GPT models that are basically used as the foundation models for this. It's not running against the public large language models or ChatGPT directly itself, for example. It's running in separate instances of those models, and it's also part of the entire trust promise that we have for Microsoft in terms of security, privacy, and compliance, and also responsible AI. So what does this mean then in terms of where you can add value? So let me boil this down in terms of what this means on your side, because a lot of the components are the same. So if you've got your own app that you're bringing to the equation, basically, the mandate that we saw was about saving users time, exceeding their expectations so they can create amazing content as quickly as possible. And that's really going to be something I think that will be pretty consistent regardless of what you're doing with generative AI. So what that means here is if you take some of these Microsoft specific words out of the equation and you bring your apps to the picture, you're building your own Copilot with your data, your indexes to get the same types of speed ups, everything on the right side is still consistent. It's still the same. But if we look at kind of where you can personalize this for your own case, this is where your apps and data are important here, and where you can add additional value through the orchestration layer that you build to augment the prompts in terms of pre-processing that grounding process or art retrieval augmented generation. And also once the response is sent back, post-processing that before you present that to the user. When we say post-processing, that can be in a number of ways. So we might want to post-process it with formatting. For example, like we saw with the SWOT analysis, where we want to have the different things bolded for the strengths, the weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Those types of things you can do as you send it back into your application. So instead of just giving you a long bit of text string as part of its response, it can give you nice paragraphs and chapter headings and headings in the format. In a PowerPoint, it can retrieve images, those types of things. So you have a lot more value in terms of how you can, again, save more time as part of how the user experiences this. So now, if we think about one way to kind of show how system prompts work, because I've mentioned this before, there's a great example that you can use right now that's at aka.ms/ent-gpt-search. If you saw the show on Microsoft Mechanics with Pablo Castro, our distinguished engineer for search and AI, he's worked with a larger team to build out this great sample proof of concept app that you can use right now using the Azure OpenAI service along with cognitive search to do some of the things that I showed, but in a more generic way. And the nice thing is it has its own data with it too. So here, for example, they've built out a sample website that has access to some information about a healthcare plan. And you can see there's already a couple of conversation turns that have happened. Does my plan cover annual eye exams, and how about hearing? Because it has the context from the first question, it knows how to answer the second question. And on the right-hand side, you can see the supporting content that's been retrieved. Now, if I show what this looks like in terms of playing it, so it has something else here, which is kind of called the thought process that we'll show in a second. So as we ask for how about hearing, we can go into the thought process to see what that means. And here you can see that what it searched for, kind of the search string. And I mentioned the system prompt. So below this search string here of the things that were searched for, you'll see that this system prompt, this top section here, is part of every single prompt in the system that basically says, you know, be brief with your answers, answer only if you've got the facts, only cite your sources, and here's how to cite them, and then it shows the sources. So this is all just one turn in terms of that prompt, but all of that is consistent every time a user asks a question, and that prompt just continues to grow like we saw in the graphic before from Microsoft 365. And additional things that you can do are the additional search approaches that you can leverage as part of testing this out with the specific app. This isn't specific to Microsoft 365 Copilot, I'm just showing this to show you an example of how system prompts work and kind of how the prompt actually builds and what's behind that once you start to gain that additional context. Again, this isn't code from Microsoft 365 Copilot. This is an app that you can use right now, and you can find it on GitHub. All right, so now let's talk about the platform, because if you think about it, now we've got a plan for our experience and what we want to build there with the experience. Then it's all about choosing the right platform. And this is one of the areas where Azure has a ton of history in terms of building out and running AI models. You know, it started more than a decade ago in terms of all of the GPU infrastructure and building the right infrastructure out in our global set of data centers. We have unique levels in terms of how we use InfiniBand and the different additional components that you can layer on top of the virtual machine. So you have the N series VMs with V and A and H series GPUs from NVIDIA. And then above and beyond that, you have directory services and monitor and all the security services around that, plus Azure Resource Manager templates, the Onyx runtime in terms of AI modeling, deep speed for hardware optimization, and of course the foundational models themselves. So you have all these different tools in the tool belt to be able to build out any app experience that you want that will scale at any scale that you need it to. And we're serious about this, because if you think about just the 2020 spec for building out for GPT-3, the supercomputer that we had in Azure, 285,000 InfiniBand connected CPU cores, 10,000 at that time V100 series Tensor Core GPUs that were InfiniBand connected. And, you know, of course, now with the larger compute models, that we can logically grow even bigger than that. And the main thing is we've got the history using things like InfiniBand, and again, having the most up-to-date and state-of-the-art NVIDIA hardware as well, that we can leverage the H100 and Hopper series to be able to do some really incredible things with some of the best infrastructure on the planet today to really build out these new AI workloads. So then it comes down to the other pillar, which I talked about earlier, which was trust. So what does that mean? So from a Microsoft 365 Copilot perspective, you know, it's all about building in the right security, compliance, privacy, and responsible AI controls as part of this. When we think about Microsoft's all-up AI principles at the company level, it's about having, you know, fairness in terms of how everything's operated, reliability and safety as you run and use our large language model instances that you can run from Azure, and the data that you're using is in terms of mastering and running and working with your data in the Microsoft 365 context, if it's OneDrive or SharePoint, or within Azure and the various different storage and data types that you can use there. And then having privacy and security controls around all of it. If you think about Microsoft 365, in our case, one of the nice things is this actually benefits in terms of having things like the Microsoft Purview controls for, you know, the ability to see documents that are generated if they've got sensitive information. And then we can use also AI in that case to do document classification automatically, and then based on the labels that get applied, apply controls. So you have those same types of consistent security and privacy concepts that will translate from your normal kind of manually built content that will also translate into your generative AI built content, and making sure that also everything is inclusive and we design for as much accessibility as possible with all of our services. It means that from an audit and logging perspective, services are transparent and there is accountability then in terms of how the services are run and operated. Of course, these things need to be built in as we operate services globally and work with you, because it's the data that you own, the data that you manage. We are basically just a service that's helping you manage that data that you own and that you control. So if we translate this back into Microsoft 365 Copilot, again, this means making sure that those same things around security, compliance, privacy, and responsible AI are met in the context of Microsoft 365. So that then leaves you with the question of what are the best things to build. So hopefully you saw from Microsoft 365 Copilot, the way that we've kind of built these more general generative AI approaches into Word and Excel and PowerPoint and Outlook and Teams and also Microsoft Loop. You've also seen maybe recently that we have some of these role-based copilots, like with sales or different services that we have added. Even recently, we announced and showed off a cost management copilot that you can do within the Azure portal, where it basically becomes a little bit more role specific. So these are all ideas that you can use as you build out your own copilots. So contextual interactions, amplifying automation, probably my favorite topic in the world, and then intuitive discovery. So being able to find, and predict what customers are doing and really lead them to the right decisions. These are all things that can really be benefited by using large language models and building copilots for that. And this isn't just something that's coming in the future. This is real right now. So we think about CarMax, where they've estimated a bunch of savings in terms of the number of years that that they can save using Azure OpenAI service in just a number of days. Progressive is an insurance company based in North America that also is saving $10 million annually with AI-powered chatbots. And EY is saving 250,000 hours of manual work per client using intelligent document automation. Again, these are things that maybe would have been quite manual in the past that you can really speed up with generative AI. So some of the best use cases that we've seen at a company-wide level: content creation and design, that's really the sweet spot in terms of Microsoft 365 Copilot. Accelerated automation, like I mentioned earlier. Personalizing the marketing, using all of that context and being able to give a nice marketing copy as part of generative AI. Chatbots and virtual assistants for support, and think about things like where you're navigating websites and you just want answers to various things. Think about navigating Microsoft.com and having a chatbot that can answer all your questions there. Some of these bigger sites, it can be massive. Product and service innovation, language translation, fraud detection, predictive analytics and forecasting, the creative writing and content generation, like we saw with things like Word, for example, and also medical research and diagnostics. So those are all things that are opportunities for you from a startup perspective. Let me know what Copilot you decide to build, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you to all of the speakers for putting this content together, and also all of the attendees for interacting with us and asking questions. We're going to wrap up, and basically we will put all of the links on the chat today. But what important is, again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the event, is if your question hasn't been answered today on the chat, if you are part of Microsoft for Startup Founders Hub, you have what we call Azure Pairing, which is on the Develop section, and you can book a session with a technical person in our team. If you are not part of Founders Hub, I will also put the link onto the chat. We also have forthcoming sessions. So there is the one on the 23rd of August, and then thank you, Amit, for putting the slides. So Azure Pairing I covered. So this is the session that you can book if you are part of Microsoft for Startup Founders Hub. But again, I will put the link on the chat, and you will receive an email in any case with all of the links that you can that you can use. If you're not part of Microsoft for Startups, you can apply via a link that we will put as well. We have 2 other sessions as part of this AI Discovery Day. So on the 23rd of August, we will have Customize Your Copilot Experience with Azure AI Studio. And on the 28th of September, Build a Responsive AI Startup Solution. And finally, as you know, we are really keen to get your feedback. So we will also send a little link for you to fill it in. And if you're part of Microsoft for Startup Founders Hub, you will have potentially the possibility to be featured on our Microsoft for Startup blog and social media, as we are asking you some questions and quote that we might be using. So again, thank you very much for joining our event. It seems that with all of the questions we had, it was relevant for you and for your startups, and we hope to see you very soon. Thank you very much.